This happened 7 years ago. That's when this terrible catastrophe happened. The horror known as the dungeon breakout began, but none of the citizens were prepared for it. Many different monsters emerged from dozens of rifts that appeared across the country, and as a result of this incident, many people died because the monsters did not spare anyone. Among the dead were also his parents. That day, Michael Nodfort lost everything in an instant. Then he promised to take revenge, shedding bloody tears, which made it even more annoying. He vowed to himself to become a monster hunter, but 7 years later, nothing has changed. He was kicked out of the hunter training center, and now the guy was sitting in despair. At this time, an inspector approached him and addressed Michael, calling him a participant. The man told him not to come to the hunter training center anymore because he had nothing to do there. Of course, Michael couldn't just accept this and asked why he was being kicked out. To this, the inspector replied that he himself knew that a couple of months was enough for a normal, awakened person. This is quite enough to complete training as a hunter, but he has been here for 7 years already. Michael looked at him, not understanding why he suddenly decided to tell him this now. And the man continued, saying that he didn't have an ounce of talent, and in general, he could be considered trash. And if they let him stay here, the image of their center will also suffer due to the lack of good personnel. But deep down, he felt sorry for the guy because he always saw how hard he trained every morning. But, on the other hand, during these 7 years of training, his stats never improved, not to mention unlocking unique characteristics and acquiring skills. Now he sat in the memorial park, clutching a can of cold coffee in anger. Suddenly, he heard the voice of a woman asking her child if she remembered how her father died. The girl replied that she knew everything because her mother had told her about it more than once. She added that when the monsters attacked, Dad died fearlessly, saving people until the very end. Mom praised her and then asked her what to do if difficulties arise in life in the future. The little girl's answer surprised Michael because she said that you need to be brave and not give up. After that, her mother hugged her, saying that her daughter was the smartest, and she laughed happily. Michael rose from his seat and walked over to them, which slightly surprised the woman and child. They wanted to ask who he was, but the guy only bowed and the next moment ran away. He didn't want to talk to them so as not to tell them about his life because he felt like a worthless person. But he was also grateful to them for the words they said. He agreed with them. But he didn't live up to them yet. And after 7 years, he couldn't just give up. With this thought, he ran to the place from which he had been kicked out today, wanting to get a second chance. It started raining in the evening, but that didn't stop the guy. He came to the right place and knocked. The inspector did not open the door right away because it was late and he was not expecting guests, so he was surprised to see him. But soon his face frowned and he told the guy to leave here because he told him everything today. Then Michael asked him to help him pass the hunter exam for the last time. He explained that he couldn't just give up, and it even seemed to him that the curator thought about his words. However, this turned out to be a false judgment. The man's name was David, and he was very angry at his request. Michael had never seen him like that before, so he was a little surprised, and he continued. He asked if the guy had come here to get his money back, but Michael said no. He shouted that for him it was not about money, because he did not come for that, but for the opportunity. But David apparently thought otherwise. He hit him and sent him away, telling the guy not to dare come here. Michael flew into the trash cans and hit his head on the wall, which caused him great pain and disappointment. David, meanwhile, said that the guy might not even be lying to him since he knows him inside and out. After calling Michael a scumbag, the man turned around to leave, leaving the boy lying on the ground. After a while, he managed to sit up, but his head hurt and his mood was depressed. He thought that if he too had a unique characteristic, or better to say, had at least a little talent, then he could change his worthless life, from which he now received only pain and suffering. Suddenly, he saw some system window informing him that the trial tower was praising him for his iron will. After reading this, Michael was surprised twice. First, that for the first time in his life someone was praising him, and then that it was some kind of tower. And then, something incredible happened. He realized that he was starting to fall somewhere into the unknown. At first, the guy was surprised, and then he got really scared because nothing like this had ever happened to him before. Then, there was a huge explosion that even David heard from his room. He didn't understand what happened there, since Michael had left there just a while ago, but he decided to go out and take a look. It seemed to him that the boy was calling for help, but when he went out to look, he was not there. Surprised, David looked around, but Michael was still nowhere to be seen. He then looked at the trash cans where he last saw the guy and saw that he was gone. Michael himself, meanwhile, was falling somewhere into the abyss, not understanding what was happening to him. It was as if he was underwater, and after a while he realized that he couldn't breathe and needed to get out. But then the water ran out, and he realized that he was continuing to fall somewhere into the unknown. He read another message, which said that the testing tower had selected all suitable candidates from the ground, and then he was asked to choose a difficulty level, and the reward he would receive would depend on the difficulty he chose. Michael didn't understand what was happening to him, but his intuition told him that he was on the right path. The guy, without thinking twice, chose the difficult difficulty level because he had nothing to lose. He realized that he had been given a chance and he had to use it to his advantage. And then something started to change and the system window said they hoped he would get good results. Then it was said that he would soon enter the first floor of the test tower, and Michael still didn't understand anything. He suspected that he was dead and dreaming all this, but his head still hurt from hitting the wall. And then suddenly he read that all status ailments and injuries were healed. The test was about to begin, and he knew something important was about to happen. But the guy never expected to find himself in the desert and without any resources. A moment later, however, he was given a sword, and Michael thought that with a weapon his chances were better. Apparently, it was some kind of survival, although he didn't fully understand why it was all there. But soon his thoughts were confirmed by the system, saying that the reward for this test was the discovery of a unique characteristic. Seeing this, Michael froze in surprise because this had been his dream for many years, as far back as he could remember. The guy thought that he would finally learn what he had been working hard on for the last 7 years of his life. After all, this unique characteristic allowed him to easily become a hunter, as he wanted. It was so incredible that it even seemed crazy, and Michael even thought that he had gone crazy. But he soon realized that his mind was not clouded, and the first thing he decided to do was take his new weapon. But as he approached the sword, the sand beneath his feet suddenly began to stir and move. Michael began to run away from him, and he rose higher and higher, forming a huge hump of sand. The guy read in the system window that a training test was about to begin. His difficulty level, which he had chosen, was displayed there, and Michael realized that this was not a good thing. A huge sand golem suddenly appeared in front of him, looking just at the guy, and he froze in horror. For him, this was something incredible, because in his life he had never defeated a single monster. And then the status window announced that he had to survive for 10 minutes, and then the task would be completed. Michael was not happy with this prospect. He began to run away as fast as he could to avoid being hit by the golem. He was also surprised that the punishment for failing this test was death in the real world. He ran away from the monster in the hope that it would not pursue him. But of course it did not. Michael himself began to doubt whether he could escape from him in this way, because it was exhausting. Moreover, the golem turned out to be much faster than he thought, and this only made his survival more difficult. First of all, because of the sand and his stamina, it was impossible to run for 10 minutes. And it was also worth doing this without rest, because at any moment he could be overtaken by death at the hands of the golem. The system had given him the sword and told him to survive, so he had little choice, and Michael knew it. He would either die trying to escape or he would die fighting. He preferred the second option. So the guy stopped and quickly thought about how he could defeat this creature, since it was made entirely of sand. Suddenly, the faces of all those who had laughed at him all these years and mocked him flashed before his eyes. Michael remembered how many times he had been called a loser and shouted that he was fed up with it. He didn't want to die a miserable death trying to just run away, even if it seemed safer. But he will never become a hunter and will never avenge his parents, who died as a result of that disaster. Of course, he wasn't going to agree to this. The guy decided to fight to the end, even if he lost. When it came to theory, he could confidently say that he knew more than many hunters. So he knew that running away was a bad idea, because the golems would only stop moving in one case. If their core is destroyed, however, it is usually located in hard-to-reach places. And if so, then he must first find the location of the core and then destroy it. Michael ran up. He knew that the core was usually located near the heart in humans, but sometimes it could also be the hand. All that was needed was to detect a faint red glow, as if from the heart. Michael decided to give it a try. He pushed off from the sandhill, intending to hit the golem with his sword. It turned out to be more difficult to do than he imagined, but Michael did not give up. He managed to reach the top of the hill just as the sand began to pour out. This played into his hands because, with his movements at the foot of the hill, he caused a small sand avalanche. Thanks to her, the golem lost its balance, and Michael was able to approach it on a sand wave. He thought he could only do it if he timed it right, so he waited a bit. And then he pushed off and jumped. A moment later, he was already on the body of the falling golem and saw its core. Michael stood up happily and walked towards him, swinging his arm to strike and keeping his balance. And then he hit it with all his strength, and the blade went straight into the core, but for some reason not all the way. It turned out to be harder than Michael thought. so only a crack remained on it from his blow. Michael froze in surprise because he hoped to end everything with one attack, but it was not enough. He realized with horror that he would need one more blow to break it completely. But the guy couldn't do it because the golem suddenly screamed in pain and started waving its arms. Michael realized in horror that the golem was about to tear him to pieces, and this thought made him nervous. He decided that he would have time to hit again, because that should be enough, but the golem's hand was already near his body. The monster grabbed him and squeezed him tightly. If it had been a stone golem, there would have been nothing left of the guy. Michael screamed furiously in pain. No matter what you say, sand in large quantities squeezes worse than a boa constrictor. For a moment, instead of the golem, he saw the faces of all those who laughed at him, mocked him, especially now. Then the guy decided that this could not go on any longer, and he would either die in battle or win. Michael gripped his sword tighter and shouted at them all to shut up, and suddenly rage gave him strength. He managed to free his hand from the golem's grip and threw his sword straight at its core, hoping to pierce it. And then, to his surprise, it happened. The sword hit the monster right in the heart and it loosened its grip. After that, he screamed loudly and began to crumble, since he was made of sand. The system window displayed a message that the guy had successfully destroyed the sand golem's core in 3 minutes. This meant that he had completed the training trial and would soon receive a reward. Michael himself was left with almost no strength. He spent the last of it to throw the sword, and now he was lying on the ground. He didn't know how long he lay like that, but if it hadn't been for the heat, which was unbearable, he wouldn't have gotten up. The boy fell to his knees, covered in sand from the fight with the golem. He couldn't believe he had done it. He was spitting blood and breathing heavily, but he was alive, and this thought warmed him, giving him new strength. Of course, it was dangerous, and at any moment he could say goodbye to his life, but he still succeeded. Michael stood up and was very glad that he survived, and the system window congratulated him on passing the first floor. As a reward for clearing it, he received a unique characteristic and 1,000 points. He also received the quick recovery skill as an additional reward and another 500 points. Michael looked at all this with wide eyes. He still did not understand what all these glasses meant. However, if this was true, then the most important thing for him was that he was receiving a unique characteristic. He put in so much effort over the past 7 years and all he got in return was scorn and ridicule. The system window gave a message that he was receiving a unique necromancy characteristic. The boy thought with excitement that now he too could finally become a hunter. In this way, he will realize his dream, but this will only happen if he survives. He wanted to think about it some more, but suddenly, he felt some strange changes in his body. And then, at the place where he killed the golem, some strange red round thing appeared. It was covered in black fog and resembled ball lightning. And this surprised the guy very much. He decided to touch her. And at that moment, another system window appeared with a notification. It said that his necromancy stat had been activated, and he now had to make a choice. He was asked if he wanted to absorb the soul of the sand golem, and Michael thought about it with surprise. He realized that this black fog must be his unique characteristic, and made his choice. It was positive, and soon some tentacles began to extend from the ball lightning. They all entered his body, and, as Michael realized, they sucked right into his heart, which caused him pain. And then he read that he had successfully absorbed the sand golem's soul, and his skill had increased by 7%. For some time, the tentacles continued to enter him, and all of this was swallowed up by the black fog. Michael was also surprised that he suddenly stopped feeling any pain in the area of his heart. The only emotion he had was surprise at how the absorption process was happening. But then the golem's soul itself approached him and entered his body, where the guy's heart was. The soul left no signs of injury behind, and everything happened without pain. The system window showed that he still had 4 of the 5 souls left, and Michael suddenly realized that he could feel the golem's soul. It turned out that he could store souls if he absorbed them, and the guy thought that this could be used. Then he read that he could also increase his stats by receiving souls, and he decided to use this. His strength increased by 3, his stamina by 2 points, and the guy even felt something. It seemed to him as if energy was filling his body. And the most mysterious thing was that this was actually the case. His stats actually increased, and he hadn't been able to raise them for the last 7 years. According to his characteristics, he could not only store souls but also use them as he pleased. The boy happily thought that he could become an excellent hunter if he managed to return. And then suddenly he saw a small portal form in front of him, and the window changed too. He was asked to go to the waiting room, and Michael decided that he should enter this portal. Besides, it didn't seem like he had any other choice, so he slowly headed towards the portal. He walked slowly because his whole body ached from the fight with the golem, and it was serious. When he entered the waiting room, He immediately fell down from lack of strength and great pain throughout his body. Michael thought he had underestimated his wounds, but it was too late to change anything now. Suddenly, his body was enveloped in a strange green mist that had a pleasant medicinal smell. After this, the boy realized that all his wounds were suddenly healed, and he was able to stand up, wondering what had happened. He looked around and noticed that in such a rather large room there was only one bed, but Michael was too tired to think about it, so he immediately lay down on her. He thought about what he should do now, because getting out of the tower seemed like a difficult task. He also didn't understand why this tower had called him here, but suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by another message. It said that he now had 5 commands available: information, store, community, inventory, and challenge, saying the command would activate it, and Michael slapped himself in the face, saying that he had to survive first and foremost. He called the test command and saw that there was almost 1 day left until the next test on the 2nd floor. He couldn't choose it yet, but the guy noticed that he would probably have a lot of such tests. He then called up the community team and was faced with an hour of people discussing the same topic. Everyone in the thicket was confused, and it looked like there were some here who weren't hunters. But suddenly the chat was blocked because the admin entered it, and Michael was even more surprised by this. The admin, meanwhile, said that he had important information that he could share with them. Michael realized that he had to focus because it could help him get out of here. The admin talked about the points they received after the test. Here they served as local currency. They were necessary for survival, because without them they would not receive even a drop of water in the Tower of Trials. Michael thought that since points were only earned through challenges, he should do everything to have enough. After all, without them he won't be able to survive. The admin said that that was all for him and left the chat. Michael realized that at first he had hoped to become a hunter simply after returning home. But it seems like he's stuck in this trial tower now and has to play by its rules. His gaze fell on the sword, but he knew that he could do little with just a sword. Then he called the shop command, and after some time he was successfully training with the acquired shield. It seemed to Michael that all the hunters had lost all their stats when they entered the tower, but they had an advantage. After all, they should be able to more easily master the skills they had previously mastered. And this was important to Michael. After all, he was at different levels than them, so he had to train to catch up with the others. After a couple of minutes of exhausting training, he fell to the floor, exhausted, breathing heavily from fatigue. He thought about taking a break, but suddenly he felt his strength returning. Thanks to the healing effect of the waiting room, he realized that he could train without any problems. But soon the guy felt a new problem. It was hunger, which was ruining all his training. Of course, he couldn't just leave it like that, so he called the inventory command. There he saw the items he had already purchased, on which he had spent almost all of his points, of which he had only 40 left. If it weren't for the additional reward, he wouldn't even be able to dream of a shield. But now he needed to satisfy his hunger. Time flew by unnoticed, and there were already 17 minutes and the same number of seconds left before the 2nd floor test. Michael noticed that even the restless chat had quieted down, as it was almost time for the next test. For a moment he wondered if he could survive again, because this time everything would be even more difficult. However, the guy quickly dismissed this thought, telling himself that he would definitely survive this time too. Meanwhile, there were only 10 seconds left before the test, and apparently every participant was on edge. And then the waiting time was over, and everyone heard a deafening sound in their waiting rooms. A final message from the system appeared, asking if they were ready for the test. Michael responded positively, and soon a new portal appeared that he had to enter, and the guy did so. The guy was surprised to notice that this time the location was a forest, and on the one hand it made everything easier. Then he read that the purpose of this test was murder. He had to kill the leader of the orc tribe. Most likely he had such tasks because he chose the hard difficulty. But killing the chieftain of the orc tribe was nothing compared to the sand golem, and that made him nervous. Michael couldn't believe that he would have to sneak into a camp infested with monsters and kill their boss. He stood on the mountain and managed to count at least 20 orcs who had not yet noticed him. The guy decided that it would be harder to survive this time, but that didn't mean he was giving up. As you know, orcs are not particularly developed creatures. They kept to small camps and had their own boss. All the monsters obeyed him, but at their core, each one was just a dumb creature with honed skills. Michael knew he could defeat the chieftain without even engaging in a fight with the rest of the orcs, but it would be difficult. The guy also knew that usually in the dungeons, if there is a sentry in the orc tribe, one should also expect a hunter. However, Michael was not sure that he could defeat even one hunter, because they were stronger than the others. The problem was that there were too many orcs, so hunters usually had to form a group. He couldn't do it alone, and Michael knew what he had to do, but the idea seemed ridiculous to him. He decided to take a step back for now and come up with a plan, because he was impeccable in one thing, and that was his mental skills. After a while, he realized with a smile on his face that he had come up with a way to pass this test. After some time, he had already collected the required amount of materials needed for his plan. Now there was only one thing left to do, to move on to its implementation. Michael constructed some kind of torch, and then he called the inventory command and sent his new product there. The system window with his inventory showed that he had a new item, and Michael smiled contentedly. This meant that his theory had worked, and now he could move on to the next point of his plan. Although orcs look like lazy pigs, they are actually quite a diligent race. They stay in small groups, which allows them to quickly respond to any danger. Hunters always leave for hunting in the morning and return by sunset, so he still has plenty of time. The biggest obstacle in this mission was breaking through the numerical superiority, so he had to use something that would make all the orcs scatter and open the way for him to reach the chieftain. Michael knew that, according to the Hunters Association, the orc sentry was not always on guard. They usually returned to the village to eat or rest for a while. Therefore, he must use this time to perform a deceptive maneuver for his plan to work. Michael threw the torch into the bushes and hurried to the pond, which was located near the village. After some time, when the fire spread, the orcs also noticed it, and the boy knew that if the flames completely engulfed the village, he would not have to worry about meeting the hunters. After all, they would be returning from hunting, but first, he had to kill at least 2 orc workers. As expected, several of them ran to the pond to get water and put out the flames. That's where he was waiting for them, and when one orc filled a bucket with water, the guy went behind him. The next moment, his blade pierced the orc's neck and he dropped the bucket from his hands and fell to the ground. Michael, meanwhile, activated his unique necromancy ability. The system window asked if he wanted to absorb the orc's soul, and the guy answered positively. When he did this, his skill increased to 9% and he felt another soul inside him. However, immediately after that, he heard someone approaching him from behind. It turned out to be an orc guard. Michael managed to react to his attack in time and put his shield under the blow, protecting his head. This orc was stronger than the others, and the guy barely managed to hold back his onslaught, but he did not give up. Then, an unexpected solution came to him. He realized that he could add strength to himself if he lacked it. Why did Michael use the absorbed soul of LRK to improve his stats? As a result, his strength increased by 4 and his agility by 2 points, allowing him to repel the sentry's attack. After a couple of minutes, the orc was defeated, and Michael activated his characteristic again, absorbing his soul. He increased his stats again, and in the meantime, his quick recovery skill was working. Thanks to the new soul, his agility increased by 3, strength by 2, and endurance by 4 points. After some time, he moved away from the pond, the area around which had already caught fire. He was noticed by the other orcs, who were preparing for another battle, but Michael's face showed confidence. He had already killed 3 workers, 1 sentry, and an old chieftain, successfully absorbing their souls and increasing their stats. The boy understood that if he was careful with the sentries, he would have no problem defeating the leader. Additionally, thanks to the absorption of the sentry, the orc workers no longer posed a threat. Michael easily defeated them one after another and did not forget to absorb souls, increasing his stats. But when he killed another worker, a more experienced opponent appeared. The new sentry was already running towards the guy, hiding behind the corpse of his clansman. He attacked Michael with his club, but he was able to defend himself thanks to his shield. On the other hand, this meant that the sentry had gotten rid of the leader, thereby leaving him alone. Accordingly, this sentry was the last obstacle on the way to the leader, and Michael had to overcome him. He dodged his new attack and caught the moment when his opponent weakened his defense. The boy then charged at the orc guard, ducking under the blow he was hoping to use to get him. He pierced the monster's stomach, causing it to die, while Michael successfully absorbed the soul of the last sentry. The guy used it to increase his stats, but at that moment the chieftain brought his staff cane, which turned out to be magical, and then he attacked him with his... Michael didn't even know how to react to the charge from the pillar of fire that fell right on the guy, as he froze in place from fear. But at the last moment he managed to put up a shield, with which he managed to defend himself from the leader. He looked surprised because not everyone could survive his fire attack, but this guy could. Seeing that the enemy was still standing on his feet, the leader screamed in a strange, broken voice. Meanwhile, Michael read in the next system window that he had a new skill, fire resistance. He also received a new achievement, the one who passed through fire and prepared to finish off the orc leader. He looked him straight in the eyes, and the leader did not take his eyes off the guy. He was interested in who he was. And then he pointed his staff at Michael again, intending to finish him off with another attack. But this time the guy was faster. In the blink of an eye, he approached the leader and swung his sword. The blow passed near his head and cut through his mask. And the orc closed his eyes in surprise and fear. He realized that he could not cope with this opponent because he was much better than him. So the orc couldn't think of anything better to do than run away. He rushed into the tent in the hope of getting away. But Michael is not going to let him go so easily because all he has to do is kill the leader and he will receive a reward. The guy followed the monster into the tent, expecting that he might still pull some kind of trick. He cut open the entrance to the tent and prepared for a surprise attack, but it did not come. Instead, the guy saw a slightly strange sight, which was definitely not to be expected. The orc chieftain sat in the center of the tent, clutching two small orcs to himself, all of them looking scared. Then another baby orc approached Michael's leg and began to tug at his leg with tears in his eyes. The guy thought that even these monsters have loved ones, and for some reason he even felt sorry to kill them. He remembers his own parents who also protected him on the day of the disaster. They did it so that he could survive. But while the guy was thinking about it, the little orc reached for his weapon. He took out a small knife and aimed it at his leg, hoping that his opponent had let his guard down. But Michael was on edge. He couldn't let himself die, so he hit the baby first. Even though the blow was delivered with the hilt of a sword, it was enough to crush the small skull. Seeing this, the chief rushed at the enemy, wanting to avenge his child, but Michael pierced him too. For a moment he hesitated, but then he remembered that he had to kill monsters. It was the least he could do. When he found himself back in the waiting room, Michael considered purchasing a new shield. He also drew attention to the chat, from which it could be concluded that half of the contenders did not survive. And then he suddenly froze in surprise when he saw one participant write that he had used his question. He did this to find out how to return to Earth, and Michael realized that such a way existed. After a while, he figured out that they could ask questions in the information command. In the community chat, players came to the decision that they should all share any information with each other. Once they reach level 5, they will be able to purchase temporary return stones to Earth, but only for a couple of days. And starting from the 8th level, they will have access to new items, one of which will allow them to return to Earth forever. Michael looked at his stats again. His necromancy had already reached 65% mastery. The boy thought that he would be invincible if he had such powers on Earth, so he wanted to return as soon as possible. But for now, he was only at level 2, and 8 was still so far away, so he decided to look for something positive. He found it in the fact that his stats were at rock bottom, but now they are approaching 20 points. To begin with, Michael decided to absorb the 5 souls he had captured, considering that he almost died in the process. After that, almost all of his stats were close to 30 points, and only magic was at 13. Michael noticed that with each improvement he felt more and more powerful, and he liked it. He suddenly started running around the room and climbing the walls without falling. Like a spider, these were not human abilities. The boy realized that he had finally overcome human limits and felt incredible strength. He jumped from the ceiling he was standing on, and miscalculated the speed with which he rushed towards the next wall. As a result, he crashed into her, leaving a dent. It was quite painful, but the healing effect worked. Michael thought that he had leveled up so quickly, which is why his body most likely had not yet gotten used to the new strength. He then opened a shop and purchased a dead tree shield which cost him 2,100 points. This shield was created by a black mage from the wood of a huge dead tree. It activated a buff when losing health. As a reward for the trial, he received a black steel dagger, which improved his stats, and also the killer's cloak, which allowed him to remain more undetected and move faster. When everything was ready, Michael exhaled. All that was left was to get used to the new items and stats. He had to do this before the next test, but that was not all. The guy wanted to become stronger than anyone could dream of, so he continued training. After a few more days, which flew by very quickly, he entered the 3rd floor of the test tower. The theme of this test was a duel, and the system once again reminded him that he had chosen the hard difficulty. Michael looked around. Apparently he was in some kind of cave where, as he thought, the duel would take place. Then suddenly a new message appeared, saying that in 10 seconds a guardian of darkness would appear. The guy realized that he would be his opponent, so he got ready, not knowing where he would attack from. As expected, the enemy acted unexpectedly. He went behind Michael, and he didn't even notice. At the last moment, the boy felt something scatter in the air near his head, and he realized that he was under attack. He barely managed to turn around and cover himself with a shield, but the attack still slightly hurt him. The Guardian of Darkness looked quite terrifying. He was also strong, and this forced one to act more carefully. When Michael saw it, He realized that it was a Dopenhalner, which he had read about in Hunter's reports, so he knew that physical attacks worked best against them. And with that thought in mind, he kicked him. The monster flew away a decent distance but quickly got back on his feet and they looked at each other. Dopenhalner smiled evilly. He was clearly confident of his victory because not everyone could defeat him alone. But Michael was not going to lose. He had to win at any cost in order to survive and move on. The injury he received quickly healed thanks to his quick recovery skill. And then the guy noticed with surprise something strange in the behavior of the Dopenhalner. He was made of dark matter, so he could take any form, and now he was imitating it. The monster took the same stance, and suddenly he also had a sword and shield. To make sure he would copy him exactly, Michael went on the attack. In the blink of an eye, he found himself behind his opponent, intending to attack from behind. But the Dopenhalner did not have time to react in time, so the attack was successful, and the monster was wounded. This meant that he could only copy his movements, but they were no match for Michael's strength. However, now the course of the battle had changed. The guy noticed that the Dopenhalner had stopped copying him. On the contrary, it seemed that he was angry, and the wound on his chest also began to tighten. The monster looked at the guy. He was surprised that he was able to touch him, so he didn't know what to do next. And Michael said mockingly that it seemed like he had the skill of restoration too. Dopenhalner did not answer him and again rushed into the attack. Now he was going to repeat the new maneuver. It was the same attack that Michael had used on him, so the monster copied it. However, the guy knew that he would act like that, so he easily anticipated his movements. When the monster swung his sword, he dodged and then kicked him. He already knew how to defeat him. After all, he had an advantage. He knew how to counter his own techniques. The initiative was clearly on the guy's side. He was pushing the Dopenhalner towards the wall in order to finish him off there. During this time, his fencing skills had improved significantly, and he thought that his training had not been in vain. But suddenly, when he was about to knock out his opponent, the guy saw a sword right in front of his eyes. He was able to quickly regroup and block the attack, but the monster was also able to retreat. Michael froze in surprise, not understanding what just happened, because he did not use this move. And then the Dopenhalner took the initiative into his own hands and began to push Michael against the wall. It was no coincidence, as they had only been fighting for a short time, but the monster had already evolved. It was now harder to block his attacks, even though he still copied all of his movements. Michael then activated his assassin's cloak skill, and his movement speed increased by 15%. This also meant that he had to finish everything in less than a minute. After all, it was only for that long that the effect of the cloak lasted that Michael rushed to attack the enemy. He also seemed to notice that the guy had become faster, but for now, the monster decided not to retreat. Michael, meanwhile, was already opposite him and swung for another attack, which was a feint. So when the Dopenhalner swung his sword to deflect it, Michael kicked him. The monster was not ready for this, but it was not the end. The guy was already preparing to finish him off. Then came a sharp lunge that pierced the doppelganger. But the guy did not foresee the consequences of this. He thought he had succeeded and decided to kill the monster completely as soon as it fell to the ground. So far, the Dopenhalner had only screamed loudly from the injury he had received, but then something strange happened. For some reason, Michael's hand was also cut off, and he was unable to even scream from the immense shock and horror. He expected this, although everything indicated that it must be somehow connected with the monster's copying ability. Then Michael also screamed. The pain was incredibly strong and made it difficult to concentrate. But the guy understood that this was not the end, because if he won, he would certainly get his hand back. Besides, the Dopenhalner hasn't moved yet either, which means that he does have the recovery skill. But it looks like he needs time to recover from this kind of attack. So this was his chance to win. But without a sword, it was difficult to do so. Michael came up with a plan. He has 15 seconds of the Assassin's Cloak effect remaining, meaning he will soon lose his speed. Deciding that he had nothing to lose, he grabbed the shield, telling himself that he would win. After all, it was better to take a risk than just wait for death. Perhaps this had become his credo lately. With this thought, he pounced on the monster. He had only one shield, on which he put everything. Seeing the guy approaching him, the Dopenhalner was surprised by his determination. It even scared him. He swung his remaining arm to block the attack, but the guy couldn't even attack. He relied on the point of the shield, which had become his new and final weapon, hoping to pierce the monster with it. Then Michael ducked under his attack, dodging the arm, and was able to press the shield into the doppelganger's stomach. He couldn't even scream and fell to the ground a few steps away from the guy. He didn't move anymore. But the monster was not dead yet. He was waiting for his recovery and looked at the guy with hostility. And Michael swung to finish him off, saying that now he would have another creature on his account. It always gave him strength to kill monsters to avenge his parents. And with this thought, he brought his shield down straight into the Dopenhalner's heart, causing him to die a quick death. Immediately after this, a system window appeared, congratulating him on passing the third floor of the test tower. When he returned to the waiting room, all his injuries and defects were healed and he had feeling in his arm again. It was much better with her, but now he had to prepare for the fourth floor and Michael resumed training. He hit the wall in his room with all his might and left a huge dent there which spoke of his power. The guy thought the healing worked great because he didn't even feel anything. He had the soul of a doppelganger, which he absorbed after defeating the monster. The consistency of his soul, however, was so dense that it could not be compared with others. Michael was surprised that the souls of all the monsters were different depending on their strength and abilities. He was also pleased that his mastery of the characteristics of necromancy had reached perfection. Now her rank had increased by 1 level, of which there were 5 in total, and the current progress was 0% level 4. As a result of this, he was given another skill. Michael received the chance to acquire the skill of absorbing the soul. In other words, he could now absorb not only souls but also their skills. Although the effect did not always work, just like he was able to get accelerated regeneration only after being on the verge of death a couple of times. Skills could never be acquired simply by snapping a finger, and he understood that well now. Michael called the community team and entered it. There were now 880 members out of 1508. This was already his third time back in the waiting room, so he felt like he was at home. Suddenly, the guy came across interesting information about the next test. They were talking about it in the chat. Someone said that this time the test would be combined, and that was a bit confusing. One guy named Kim said that he might be exaggerating, but he found out that the theme of the challenge would be competition. And since they are talking about a competition between hunters, this could very well even mean murder. When Michael read this, sweat broke out on his forehead. The guy realized that the guys in the community were serious. It turned out that in the next test, each of them had the chance to kill a person. After some time, the system window notified everyone about the start of the fourth floor test. The condition for its successful completion is to defeat the Goblin King within the allotted time. The failure condition was the destruction of all candidates selected for the team or the expiration of time. The penalty for failure was death, but Michael already knew that the main thing in this matter was to remain calm. When he entered the portal, it sent him to a new location and he saw his team for this test. These were also the first people he had seen in a long time, so it was a little strange. Michael felt awkward because lately he had only encountered monsters. The first to speak was the girl in the big blue cloak. She invited everyone to introduce themselves and began first. Her name was Beatrice, or Beatty for short. Her weapon was a magic staff, and she inspired confidence. She added that on the outside she was a rank 4 hunter and specialized in providing support to the team. Hearing that she was a hunter, the guy who was the second member in their team snorted in satisfaction. He introduced himself as Magnus, saying that he specialized in close combat and was a rank 5 hunter. Michael thought he was being rather rude, like a low-ranking hunter, since they were more modest on the ground. Then it was his turn. Michael introduced himself, saying that he also specializes in close combat. He added that he was not yet a hunter on the outside but was undergoing training, and Magnus chuckled with displeasure. He called him cadet, telling him not to even dare to get under his feet. Michael was a little surprised by this behavior, but it wasn't like he had heard it addressed to him for the first time. The guy simply said that he was confident that he was a good fighter and could handle the role assigned to him. But Magnus did not change his attitude towards him, saying that he would kill him immediately if he saw that he could not cope. Michael thought that he was actually already used to this kind of look because he had encountered them all his life. For a moment, he forgot about this nightmare, but finding himself again among people, everything surfaced again. Looking at Magnus, he thought that he was getting on his nerves and he could confidently say that he had enough strength to make him shut up. After all, in the Tower of Trials, everything is decided by skills, and he had them very well developed. Meanwhile, 2 more system windows appeared, reminding us of the rules and theme of this test. Then the main gates of the Citadel opened, where all participants had to enter from different sides. And as soon as this happened, small goblins with axes and other weapons immediately came towards them. They intended to surround their squad and pounced on the first one standing, which turned out to be Magnus. The boy was surprised that goblins could fight in such a battle formation, and turned to Michael. He shouted why he wasn't fighting, but the guy had his own tactics for fighting. Besides, Magnus didn't even look in his direction, and yet he had already managed to kill 2 goblins. While Magnus held off the rest of the goblins, Betty finished preparing for the spell. She needed a little time to finish everything, but Michael noticed that Mashnus needed help now. He told the surprised girl that he would leave her for a while, and after these words he rushed to his friend. Thanks to his cloak, his speed was incredible, so he was next to him in an instant. But Betty screamed that if he left like that, then who would cover her from behind? But the girl didn't finish because no more sounds could be heard from behind. She turned around and saw that all the goblins that came from behind were killed. The girl couldn't believe her eyes. It was the first time she had seen someone deal with the monsters so quickly. Meanwhile, the goblins were attacking Magnus with renewed vigor, and it was already difficult for him to hold them back. The boy sagged under the weight of his sword, expecting that soon Betty would give him strength with a spell. But this did not happen, and the goblins realized that it would be more effective to attack from different sides. One of them wielded a mace that was attached to a metal whip and directed his attack at Magnus. The guy didn't expect this and was surprised to see the weapon fall out of his hand. His great sword fell nearby, but there was no time to go after it because he would be finished off immediately. Then a new goblin with a machete jumped on him, and the guy could only cover himself with his hands, hoping for the best. He screamed why he was so unlucky to be on the same team as a cadet. But the next moment, Magnus ducked as someone rushed past him with an attack. The guy looked at the man in surprise and saw Michael, who had killed the monster that was threatening him. The remaining goblins screamed as another of their comrades was killed, and they retreated for a moment. Seeing that the cadet had protected him, Magnus couldn't find the right words to say to him. But Michael didn't expect anything. He simply told the master to stand aside for now. Magnus would normally have been angry upon hearing this, but now he was rather discouraged by it. Then Michael destroyed him mentally by adding that the guy should not get under his feet. In the blink of an eye, he then dealt with the rest of the goblins who continued to advance. The system window displayed a message that he had received a new achievement, Goblin Hunter. But the one who was most surprised was Magnus, who even opened his mouth in surprise. So shocked was he by Michael's skills. When it was all over, he had successfully absorbed as many goblin souls as he could. He also made the discovery that the black haze from his characteristic was invisible to other people. After that, he increased his stats. Strength by 3, agility by 4, endurance by 2, and stamina by 7 points. But suddenly, he saw that he had also absorbed one of the Goblin Guard's skills, and this surprised Michael. This skill included a larger vision radius which helped to spot enemies faster. Michael decided to try it out for himself right away and concentrated to get a feel for the skill. After a while, he got it. It was like zooming in on something you can't see with a phone camera. Michael smiled contentedly because this was another jackpot, even though no one else got anything. Magnus, meanwhile, in order to somehow justify himself, said that the cadet was very lucky. He added that he had done a good job, but both Michael and Betty looked at him questioningly. Michael then said that from now on he would be in charge of the operation, moving in the vanguard. He didn't forget to ask if Magnus had any objections to this, still teasing him. But the guy didn't have anything like that. He just looked at him strangely and then answered negatively. Then Michael added that the guy just needed to protect the hunter Betty, and he himself would fight in the front. Michael told the girl that she should just continue doing everything she had been doing before. Betty replied that she understood him, then said that she was resuming her search for the target and used magic. A few minutes later, they were already fighting another squad of goblins, and Michael was successfully absorbing their souls. His unique attribute Mastery Level 4 was already at 12%, and there were 14 hours left to test. It soon became dark and they set out to find shelter, saying that the battles with the goblins had been exhausting. Although they attacked with varying frequency, everything had calmed down now, and Michael began to think. Then he suddenly jumped up and ran somewhere himself, while his partner stood there in surprise. Betty asked what was going on, but suddenly she saw what Michael was running towards. It was water. To be more precise, the beautiful fountain is probably the only thing that has survived in this area. Magnus said he thought the other contenders had already been here, and everyone was surprised at their speed. Michael, meanwhile, leaned over and tasted the blood of a goblin killed nearby. It was still warm. Therefore, if they hurry, they will be able to catch up with other contenders because in case of victory of the other team, those who fail the test will die, and they will never return to Earth, but will be buried here. Neither of them liked the prospect, so Michael said they'd better hurry. Meanwhile, the other team met the Goblin Squad again, but they posed no threat to them. There was a guy on their team with equipment like Michael's, and he did a great job too. There was also another guy present who had mastered an unknown ghostly art. His name was Thomas, and he said he was sick of these constant little skirmishes, but it looked like this was the last one. The boss was supposed to appear after that, but for now, it was necessary to focus on fighting the goblins. The guy had been sitting on the head of one of them the whole time, but then he cut it off and pushed himself away from the dead body. He rushed at the goblins that remained, his eyes burning with hatred for the monsters, and it was terrifying. In a moment, all the monsters were finished and he stood among the goblin corpses. His comrades praised him, saying that he had done a good job and done an excellent job. But Thomas replied that he was tired of this ugly hunt because he had to do everything alone. He then turned to one of the guys, whose name was James, asking if he liked skimming off all the cream. He didn't quite understand what he was asking, so Thomas irritably ordered to simply open the boss's room. They already wanted to finish everything as quickly as possible and rest in their rooms. James went to open the door as he was ordered, but the boy didn't like being ordered around like that. When he opened the door, the system window notified everyone that all members of the Challenger team had entered the spire. This was the home of the Goblin King, but the battle with him would not begin until one of the two teams remained. It was also reported that at this point it will be impossible to escape from the current location. As if to confirm this, a huge red barrier formed across its entire territory. Thomas looked at him with disdain, asking why this had suddenly happened and what these two teams were. But then he understood everything himself when he saw that there really were 3 new people standing on the other side. Michael's team arrived just in time, and now the boy was looking at those they were about to fight. Thomas grimaced in displeasure, saying that he had hoped to end everything quickly. But Michael suddenly said that he would fight alone, which greatly surprised his team. Secondly, he asked Betty to provide him with a buff that increased agility. Everything else she could supply to Magnus. To this, the girl replied that she had the chance to see with her own eyes how strong he was. However, perhaps people would be more terrible than all these monsters put together, and that was true. Michael said he heard her, adding that he would signal if he thought he was in danger. Until then, he counted on their support, and with these words the guy rushed into battle. His agility was increased by 2 points, and this effect lasted for 10 minutes thanks to Betty's spell. Michael himself has already become convinced that he has surpassed the skill level of the average hunter. Besides that, he had just killed over 30 goblins. The guy noticed the other team getting ready. Finally, Michael thought that his current self was strong enough to handle this challenge. With this thought, he rushed to attack 3 people at once, which surprised and alerted them a little. Thomas didn't understand where he came from, but he saw that the guy looked quite confident. He ordered James to use his shield at full power and to do so immediately. The guy with curly hair began to carry out the order, activating the defense. Apparently, he had a magic shield. That was true, and Michael realized it too when he saw the boys covered in a magical dome. However, it couldn't be called a strong barrier, so he prepared to break it. He pushed off the ground and hit it with all his might, causing it to split into many cracks. A moment later, the protection disappeared completely, and James, who was controlling it, fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Michael was already almost close to Thomas, and he realized that this opponent was quite strong. Michael attacked their team, and the guys didn't have time to react in time. He even wounded some of them. Betty and Magnus watched all this with surprise, clearly not expecting to see such skill. And Michael continued. He was already rushing towards Thomas, who, as he realized, was the leader of their team. The guy also realized that now the main battle would be his, so he prepared for it. Their blades met, but to everyone's surprise, Michael was pushing the guy, who was only defending himself. It was also strange that Michael's skills were inferior to Thomas's, but he easily blocked all of his attacks. The guy decided that, in that case, he should act more decisively. However, when he was about to perform some maneuver, Michael suddenly appeared behind him. Then came a pretty strong attack, which should have been decisive for the guy. But when Michael thought he had won, Thomas suddenly blocked his sword, bending his body strangely. He did it almost in a jump, which greatly surprised Michael, because he did not expect such reflexes from his opponent. Thomas, meanwhile, began to get angry that he could not seize the initiative in the fight, so he began to act. Michael noticed that the boy had unusual eyes, thanks to which he could see the trace of the blade aimed at him. Thomas jumped to the side, choosing the right moment to counterattack, but Michael was not going to retreat. Suddenly, Thomas saw the shield that served as Michael's protection flying towards him. As it turned out, this was done intentionally, because this way the guy had a limited field of vision, and Michael was already running towards him with another attack, hiding behind the shield from below in order to hit the enemy this time. The next moment, he pierced him with his blade, and Thomas could not see it because of the shield. He spat out blood, amazed that there was someone who could defeat him and even seriously injure him. Meanwhile, Michael's system window announced that he had received an additional reward after the test. Thomas was dead. The attack had hit vital organs, so the guy couldn't survive, but those were the rules. The penalty for losing was death, and everyone knew it, even though they looked very shocked. Betty noticed that Michael was shaking for some reason, and she realized that he himself was also out of sorts because of the murder. She turned to him, asking if he was okay, to which the guy replied that he was fine. He added that the girl shouldn't worry, but his gaze was somehow distant. Betty decided that he was interrupting in shock because of the murder he had just committed. Michael then asked them if they would mind going and fighting the boss right now to finish the challenge. Betty and Magnus responded positively, saying that they were ready to do it immediately, and Michael nodded. After some time, they defeated the goblin boss, and the decisive blow was dealt, as always, by Michael. The guy plunged his sword into the monster's back where his vulnerable spot was, and he died from it. The system window displayed a message stating that the test target had been destroyed. As a reward, all stats increased by 4. And as an additional reward, Michael received a new skill. It was a rank 3 instant acceleration, and when it was all over, they safely passed through to the portal. Magnus hurried back first. He was a little afraid of Michael, but Betty lingered at the entrance to the portal. She suddenly turned to him, telling the guy not to worry about what happened today. The girl said that perhaps her words were out of place, but he just did what he had to. Someone had to kill the enemy team anyway, and if he refused, she would join the fight. This surprised Michael a little. He thanked her, saying that her words made him feel better. Then the girl clicked something in her system window, and Michael saw that he had received a message. The applicant Beatrice Carroll sent him a friend request, which surprised the guy because he didn't know that such a thing was possible here. Betty explained that they had passed the test today thanks to him, so she felt indebted. The girl added that in the future, when he returned to Earth, he should find her in the White Guild. Michael looked at her without saying a word, but he understood what the girl was trying to tell him. When she went into the portal, he realized that he had to make an important decision for himself. It was whether to absorb a human soul or not. He thought about it, looking at Thomas. Once Michael was convinced that he was capable of something like this, he put the process aside for later. He did it because he felt he was about to cross an irreversible line, but now he has made up his mind. Although he had no intention of killing people to become stronger, but in a situation where there is no right to choose. He was ready to commit murder. With this thought, Michael absorbed Thomas's soul, continuing to look for justification for himself. He thought that, in addition to his very first desire to become a hunter, new ambitions began to grow in his soul. After all, the Tower of Trials had given him a chance, and he wanted to take full advantage of it, continuing to move towards the top. When the absorption process was completed, he also entered the portal and came out in the waiting room on the 5th floor. To his surprise, the system immediately announced the expansion, creating a ranking of applicants. Michael didn't understand what it was, but it required him to enter a nickname. The guy even thought for a bit, because he hadn't played many computer games in his life. He didn't have to think for long, however, and soon he saw that his nickname had been changed to Hunter. Then the system summed up the results of the 4th floor test, showing a list of candidates. All were in plain sight. Michael started looking for his nickname, thinking that perhaps he was somewhere on this list. And so it was, he saw himself in 16th place and was very surprised by his rating in this test. After all, he was much higher than he thought, and then the system added that the applicants entered the top 50. They will be designated as pioneers, and those who receive this status will receive an advantage on the 8th floor. And if they continue to maintain the pioneer status up to the 8th floor, they will receive the Yahello privilege. Michael was surprised by this, but thought it was some kind of skill granting. He decided to find out the details when the time came, but for now he should focus on his growth. Now he could absorb up to 15 souls and store them all, so it was worth increasing his stats. When he did this, he felt that he had finally crossed the boundaries of human capabilities. On the 5th floor, access to the purchase of a stone of return to Earth opened, even if only for 3 days. But Michael decided to take advantage of this chance and purchase this item for glasses in the store. He also wanted to check if he could move with his equipment. When he absorbed the Stone of Objection, the system indicated that his next temporary point was the Earth. The absorption process began, and Michael felt as if something was pulling him in. The feeling was the same as when he went to the trial tower, and the emotions were the same. And then it was all over. As suddenly as it had started, he was lying on his bed at home. He was wearing the same dirty t-shirt as the first day, the same pants, and he also felt that he smelled bad. Michael thought that he really was at home, which meant that the transfer really worked. He rose on his elbows, intending to look around first, but this really was his room. The guy hadn't closed the window since the last time he was here, so it was a bit chilly now. In the midst of the summer heat, it was just what he needed. Michael fell back onto the bed, amazed at how soft it was. The only thing that spoiled the whole picture was his own smell from dirty clothes. So he decided to take a shower and got out of bed to do so, but was suddenly surprised. After all, his items from the Tower of Trials were lying on the floor, which he accidentally stepped on. Michael decided to check it out just in case, but it seemed like they could actually carry objects with them. However, this also meant that other contenders would likely be able to carry weapons as well. Soon the number of those returning to Earth will increase, which will lead to a sharp increase in the number of objects. This would cause the prices of Hunter's equipment to drop on the market, so he should get rid of his items. But the problem was that only those who have the qualifications of a hunter can sell them on the market. With that thought in mind, he reached for his phone, intending to make an important call that would change everything. Inspector David watched the training of those training to become hunters from his office. All the boys and girls were fighting pretty well when suddenly he was distracted by his phone. He accepted the challenge, introducing himself as an instructor at a hunter training center. Michael introduced himself in response, asking if he remembered him, to which the man after a while responded positively. He asked why he didn't apply for a refund online, but Michael said the man might not have to pay back the tuition fees he paid. Then he asked again if he was really serious about it, but Michael only confirmed it. He said that in return he would have one single request of him, and David was already starting to dislike this. The man wanted to refuse him right away, thinking that the guy would again ask to let him resume training. But Michael suddenly asked for help in passing his hunter exam, and then David reminded him of his unsuitability. Michael then calmly accepted that his midterm assessment had not gone as well as he would have liked. However, if the instructor refused to help him, he could easily change his mind about the payment made. After all, money is never superfluous, so he offered him a deal where only one thing was required of him. When the guy finished the call, he immediately went to the bathroom and was now looking at his body in the mirror. He noticed that it had changed greatly in proportion to his progress in the trial tower. But now was not the time to admire himself, because he had agreed to take the hunter's exam today. Michael quickly got dressed and went outside. The first thing he saw was his neighbor. The boy thought that he missed this everyday life because he was pleased to see even his neighbors. He decided to greet the girl, and she responded in kind, albeit without much enthusiasm. But Michael still wished her a good day, because he knew that everyone in the house thought of him as a loser. And it really had been that way until now, because today he would make them all look at him differently. A couple of minutes later, he was already hailing a taxi, raising his hand up, but no one stopped. Time was running out, and Michael realized that at this rate, he might even be late for the exam. So, without thinking twice, he decided to use his skills and made his way across the rooftops. He thought that running to his destination was also a good option, considering that it would avoid him getting stuck in traffic. At this rate, he arrived at the place even faster than if he had caught a taxi, and he liked it. The Hunters Association was a huge building, more like a skyscraper. That's where Michael headed, and when he entered, he saw that the right people were already meeting him. One of them was instructor David, who fulfilled his request, and with it the deal. Michael greeted him again, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and the instructor agreed. A smile appeared on his face because, in fact, he couldn't hate the guy for his lack of talent. Michael, meanwhile, shared that he had been through a lot lately, and that he felt like a different person. David was a little surprised by this information, because he remembered that he said goodbye to him near the garbage bins. At this point, another man spoke up, introducing himself as the examiner who would be marking his test. The man's name was Kim, and he asked the boy if he had any questions about how the exam was going. But Michael replied that he was well aware of this, so they could immediately move on to the essence of the test. A couple of minutes later, he was already standing in a special room. He was given a sword, and the guy got ready. David approached Mr. Kim, asking if he remembered his request to expel the boy as soon as possible. The examiner replied that there was no need to worry about that and turned to Michael, telling him to choose the desired difficulty. He could choose from 1 to 10, and the boy remembered how he had always chosen the first degree before. A goblin appeared before his eyes, who defeated him every time no matter how hard he tried. But the problem was that he didn't have enough of them then, because he was very weak. The feeling when David announced that he had failed the test was so bitter that he almost cried. David advised him from the balcony to choose the easiest first level of difficulty. But Michael unexpectedly chose the 10th, which greatly surprised the instructor and examiner. The guy himself watched their reaction with satisfaction, since, probably, few people chose the most difficult level. David thought he was crazy, because he remembered very well that he had lost even to a first-degree goblin. And then the exam began, the essence of which was to hunt a firebird, and Michael saw it. He also felt his movements slow down, which turned out to be a special effect. Moreover, his sword suddenly cracked in several places at once, and this was very serious. It turns out that David personally slipped him a broken weapon so that the guy would fail the exam. He wanted Michael to finally give up on his attempts to become a hunter by losing once again. But for now, the boy stood firmly on his feet in front of the bird, which rose up to attack him. Her entire body was covered in flames, but Michael stood calmly and analyzed the monster's behavior. He realized that this was his last chance to become a hunter, so he couldn't screw it up. Among the names of those who passed the hunter's exam was his name, so David was very happy that he became a hunter. At that time, it seemed to him that he was the best, but in reality, everything turned out to be completely different. Gradually, the gap with his peers began to widen, and eventually he gave up trying to fill the gap. The man thought that the world of hunters was based on innate talent and stopped trying to change anything. People are forced to give up when they feel they have a wall in front of them that they cannot overcome. And not only he, everyone does this, because this fact must simply be accepted and you must continue living the life that you have. So the same thing should have been done to Michael Nodford, David thought, watching him fight desperately. However, it was time for him to give up and stop trying to prove to himself something that would never happen. Michael, meanwhile, saw that his blade had cracked, and this greatly surprised the guy because it was given to him. He thought that even if it was a low-level weapon, there was no way it could crack so easily. Then he realized that there was some outside interference involved, and he looked at the instructor. And David smiled maliciously, quietly asking what he would do now with the broken sword. Moreover, the bird began to attack, directing a fireball towards the guy who was defenseless. But Michael was even glad that everything turned out this way, because it was an ideal situation to test his skills. He learned a lot in the trial tower, so he would show it to everyone right now. With this thought in mind, he used the skill. It was an instant acceleration that pushed him off the ground and brought him closer to the bird. She didn't expect the guy to be so agile, and besides, he was now standing on the ceiling and looking straight at her. Michael noted that this skill was much better than the speed increase from the assassin's cloak buff. The bird, meanwhile, formed a fireball again, intending to finish him off here. But Michael decided to act ahead of the curve and ran towards her first, which surprised the monster a little. He didn't even need a whole blade to wound the bird before it could attack him. He plunged the sword straight into her eye, thus limiting her vision, and the bird screamed furiously. As expected, the sword was too short, so it was not enough to kill the monster. Michael glanced at the tile that had cracked from the bird's attack and decided he could use it. He chipped off a piece of tile and threw it with all his might at her head, intending to stun the bird. But the tile, pouring at high speed, turned into an axe with its power and chopped off her head. The piece of floor did not stop there and crashed into the wall of the balcony where Director Kim and the instructor were standing. David was surprised to think that Michael had done something incredible, but it seemed he was already finished. The bird fell unconscious to the floor, and he was congratulated on passing the exam. Michael did not forget the instructor and the examiner, apologizing for not calculating the force. He smiled contentedly, since he was able to pass the exam even with the broken weapon that was slipped to him. After a while, the woman in charge of issuing certificates handed him a card. It had his data on it, which said that he had become a rank 2 hunter, which was pretty cool. Michael thanked her, and the woman added that he could now visit dungeons and sell items at the market. Meanwhile, David was asking the examiner Kim how it was even possible for the guy to pass the test. After all, the man said that he would fail within 10 seconds. But in the end, on the contrary, he managed to cope with everything in that time. But the examiner replied that he had done everything in his power because, based on the data provided, the guy would have failed. David then asked if they couldn't have given him a lower rank, but Kim replied that they had already done so. Their conversation was interrupted by Michael, who entered the office and announced that he had received a hunter's license. He then approached David, noticing that he looked a little pale, and asked if he was okay. The man replied that he was fine and congratulated the guy on his new achievement. And Michael suddenly said that if his memory serves him right, the instructor reached rank 3 before retiring. He added that he briefly recalled him calling him trash because he really did think so. And suddenly, the thought crept into his head that perhaps David himself was the scum he was talking about. Hearing this, the man jumped up from his seat to hit him, asking if he had lost his fear. And Michael thought that, contrary to his expectations, the instructor had easily fallen for the provocation. He dodged his blow and swung to deliver his own, wanting to demonstrate his strength once again. David winced in pain as the guy hit him right in the solar plexus, and he understood that nothing would happen to him for this because he acted in self-defense. And this was a response to the aggressive actions of the instructor, who also received a slap in the face. David had time to think and wonder where a second rank got such strength from, and then he lost consciousness. In the evening, when the guy was saying goodbye to Director Kim, he asked again if he was really offering him a job. The man responded positively, saying that he would work directly for the Hunters Association, and his salary will be about 1 billion won. With these words, he handed him his business card. Finally, the man added that he was doing this because he could see his potential, but Michael was not interested. He said it appeared the difficulty level of the exam had been adjusted arbitrarily. Seeing that this made the director's face change, he said that he would not make a big deal out of it. However, it was not in his nature to make a deal with someone he did not trust at all. The remaining 2 days flew by, and now he was back in his room ready to leave. The news reported that recently there had been rumors among hunters about a mysterious phenomenon called the Trial Tower. Michael thought that everyone finally knew about the towers, so he was convinced that he had done the right thing. After all, he was able to get rid of the equipment at a very good price, so these 3 days were very productive. But his time on Earth was coming to an end, and soon he saw a familiar system window. It began a countdown, after which he would be sent back to the trial tower. Michael even wanted this a little, because he would be able to progress again and become even stronger. The guy thought that after his return he would again have a lot of work to do, and for some reason this thought made him happy. Within seconds, he was back at his waiting team in the tower, also in full gear. As expected, they were able to move objects between the tower and the real world without any problems. He took a small chest and a stone with him and decided to throw it all into his inventory for now. Then Michael jumped out of bed, deciding that he would first stretch his body a little and exercise. After that, he wanted to challenge the 5th floor, but suddenly the system gave him a new achievement and a new skill. The skill was called the Eye of Truth and was of the highest rank, which surprised Michael greatly, since he had never mastered anything like it. Based on the description, this skill allowed him to obtain all the information about the target he was observing. Of course, he still lacked skill, but the guy was most surprised by the following property. With this skill, he could determine whether the opponent's words were true or not, which was incredible. Michael thought that with this eye, he would now always be able to tell when people were lying to him. It was a pure jackpot, because not everyone could afford it, and even less so among hunters. Then Michael decided to do some shopping and went into the store, first of all buying a rank 2 Thunder Sword. After that, he bought a rank 3+ Hunter Scout Shield. For all of this, he spent a whole 9,300 points. However, although they mostly went for the sword, Michael really liked its options, so he couldn't help but buy it. This was because it had a 10% chance to apply a lightning effect when hitting an enemy. Then the guy called the test command and was asked by the system if he was ready for the test on the 5th floor. Of course, he answered positively, and a few minutes later he was already running into the portal, preparing for new battles. The theme of this test was hunting. The difficulty was high as always, and the penalty for failure was death. He had to kill the werewolf boss in the wolf ravine within a day, and Michael understood his task. He was looking forward to victory, wanting to see how the werewolves would fight him, because they were half human, half wolf. He found himself right at the foot of the mountain, where apparently there was a cave with a boss, but he still had to get to it. Meanwhile, many small wolves surrounded him and attacked from all sides, but the guy did not even flinch. He wielded his sword very well and finished off all the monsters that were there in the blink of an eye. He was even a little irritated that they turned out to be so weak, because he had hoped for stronger opponents. But suddenly he saw that new opponents were approaching him, and these were much stronger. Michael was even a little surprised by such a sharp change, but this was what he wanted. In front of him stood another pack of wolves, which were larger, stronger, and more ferocious than the previous ones. One of them snapped its teeth, and Michael felt their deadly energy. Each of the monsters was aimed at killing him, but for some reason it made the guy smile. He prepared for battle, realizing that now he would be able to test his real strength and not like in a fake exam. Michael thought that the Tower of Trials never disappoints and rushed to attack the monsters. The giant werewolves rushed at him in response, barking loudly and opening their mouths to swallow him. But Michael deftly jumped on one of them, dodging all the attacks. He realized that he was even having a little fun. Perhaps he was slowly starting to go crazy, because a normal person would not enjoy trials. However, this did not bother him much because the guy knew that he was getting stronger day by day. The system gave out information that his sword mastery had reached rank 5 perfection, and his sword skill had increased to 5+. And by level 4, his accelerated regeneration skill had increased, and Michael thought that he needed to get a new skill. After all, his current inventory characteristics have almost reached the limit of his growth, so it was worth thinking about it. The wolves, meanwhile, jumped right on him, and if it weren't for his well-developed stats, he would already be dead. Michael enjoyed honing his skills and turned to the monsters, telling them to keep attacking. After some time, everything ended. The guy absorbed the souls of the killed werewolves. He thought that he had already managed to hunt 3 times, but the lightning effect still did not appear. The system window informed him that he had absorbed many souls of mad wolves and his skill had increased by 16%. This was good, since at this rate he could achieve an increase in the rank of his unique characteristic. He had also almost reached the middle of the wolf gorge, so the boss should appear soon. But suddenly he stopped, looking in surprise at what he saw among the high rocks of the gorge. There were torn bodies of other wolves there, and the guy thought that some kind of conflict had occurred in the pack. However, he later dismissed this thought when he saw that the blows were inflicted with a sharp weapon, and the traces left nearby only confirmed his assumption. Michael decided to use his new skill and activated the Eye of Truth to find out the truth. He saw a trace of rank 3 aura that was left behind after someone carefully split the wall. Suddenly he felt uneasy, because there were too many nuances that didn't fit in his head. And then suddenly he heard someone's cry, which it was impossible to distinguish at first glance who it belonged to. But the guy felt that it was somewhere nearby and ran in what he thought was the right direction. As he ran, he saw a medium-sized cave, from where he determined that the roar was coming. But before the guy could enter the cave, a huge pink werewolf flew out from there. He was badly cut up and fell down, lying unconscious, and Michael was surprised by his sudden appearance. He realized that another monster couldn't eradicate him so much, which meant that there was someone else in the cave right now. The system window displayed a message that the werewolf boss had died, and the reason for this was currently being investigated. And Michael looked at the dead monster in confusion, not understanding why this happened on the floor. But now, the system analysis has been completed, and it has reported an intrusion into the candidate testing. Then the purpose of the test changed. Now he had to kill a challenger from another dimension. It was he who carried out the invasion, and now he showed himself to the guy completely. He looked like a knight. Michael didn't understand why he suddenly appeared here from another dimension, as the system said, but he didn't like it. He suddenly wondered if this meant that the trial tower existed in multiple worlds at once. The stranger from another dimension spoke up, saying that he was surprised that the boy had not died yet. It turned out that he was the master of this test, but alas, now it will all end for him. He attacked and Michael blocked his punch, thinking that this guy must have gone crazy too. They stood for a moment, looking at each other and assessing their strength. And then the knight held out his sword. Michael never imagined that a situation would arise where the target of his test would be lost to an intruder from another world. However, he was extremely lucky that he did not fail the test, because then it would have been all over for him. Meanwhile, the knight asked if he was so frightened that he could not utter a word. Michael prepared to defend himself from any attack, expecting anything from this man because he looked strong. He called him a knight because he was covered in armor and his sword was more like a long spear. The speed with which he moved in such gear was also surprising, but Michael could not lose. He decided to use what was at hand, or more precisely his foot, so he kicked the body of the dead boss towards him. Such an obstacle was nothing to the knight, who did not even slow down and continued to advance. When he approached the boss, he cut him down with one precise blow of his sword, but then he was a little surprised. After all, he didn't see the guy in front of him, but he felt someone come behind him and attack. His speed was incredible, and the knight realized with surprise that his defense had been broken. And Michael was already preparing for the next blow and swung to leave a more serious wound. The knight swung his sword, but the boy ducked under his arm and struck the stranger from another dimension right in the rib. However, to his surprise, the armor did not crack. And then the knight said that he had fallen right into his hands. Michael realized that the situation was becoming dangerous because he had planned to split the armor in half, but did not leave even a scratch. The knight, meanwhile, brought his sword down on him, which would have cut off his head if he had not managed to retreat. But even so, Michael was unable to maintain his balance, as the shockwave from his attack hit him even from a distance. The guy hit the rock with such force that it collapsed a little, but no debris followed. Michael realized that this opponent was the strongest he had ever fought. His shield was shattered and his sword was damaged, and his whole body was also aching from the heavy blow to the rock. And the knight was a little surprised that the guy was able to block his aura because he hoped to finish him off quickly. Michael screamed that the system had recognized him as an intruder, but he had never heard of anything like this. But the knight questioned him in return, asking how a barbarian like him could even know about floor implantation. Hearing this, Michael asked why something like this happened in his test, and the knight asked him not to hold a grudge. He added that the tower was originally such an unpredictable place, but now it's time for the guy to know his place. He swung, intending to finish the guy off, but the guy waved his hands, asking him to stop. Michael asked if he could tell what this floor implantation was, and this surprised the knight. After all, in essence, the guy was on the verge of death, but he wanted to know such things. However, he decided that he might as well tell it. since Michael was already dead anyway, so he cleared his throat. He began by saying that among the system options, the expansion of which occurs from the 8th floor, there is floor implementation. And if you buy a ticket for a floor implementation in the store, then you will have the opportunity to interfere with other people's tests. Then Michael asked if the stranger really came from another world, as he thought. Hearing this, the knight smiled, although the boy did not see his smile, and asked if he really thought so. Meanwhile, Michael activated his new skill, the Eye of Truth, to check the veracity of his words. The system window showed that his opponent's words were true, but for some reason the knight saw it too. He became angry, asking how he dared to doubt his words and wanted to pounce on him again. However, Michael replied that he couldn't do anything about it because, in fact, he wasn't even injured. The knight called him a barbarian scum, asking if he dared to be insolent towards him. And Michael said that he got the information, so he should share a fun fact with the guy too. He said that thanks to his pain tolerance skill, his injured arm was of little use to him. It's just that if he let her go, the accelerated regeneration skill would activate. Then he showed it. Finally, he added that it seemed to him that the knight would share information with him if he were in such a position. And he asked if the guy was just testing his healing skills because, if that was all, then he would not escape death. However, Michael got back on his feet and grabbed his thunder sword, saying sarcastically that he didn't even know what to do. After all, his strength continued to grow rapidly. He increased his stats with the help of the souls he had previously absorbed. Stamina, durability, strength, agility, and mana had all increased by 4, and he felt it clearly. It seemed that the knight also noticed these changes, and he asked if the boy really had a unique characteristic. And Michael, instead of certification, activated the temporary effect of the killer's cloak, which added speed to him. He only had a minute left, so he had to hurry. And this time Michael pounced on his opponent first, and the knight was already seriously surprised because it was strange to him that the applicant from the 5th floor had so many skills. Michael, meanwhile, was rapidly approaching him, preparing to hit the weak points of his armor this time. They clashed again in battle, but this time he was more cautious and moved incredibly fast. The knight didn't understand why this guy had such outrageous stats, because he was only on the 5th floor. He realized that at this rate he might lose, so he decided to end it all with the help of aura. However, this time Michael was ready for his attacks and was able to jump back from his crushing blow in time. But the knight did not plan to stop there and continued to attack, masterfully wielding his sword. Michael knew that the aura was a high-level skill, so a blow like this could cause serious damage to him. However, he was definitely ahead of the knight in terms of stats, so he was able to dodge without any difficulty. However, the real problem was that armor, because his equipment was also of a high level, and with Michael's current abilities, it was impossible to break through it, no matter how hard he tried. But the guy knew that he had another trump card. Continuing to strike blow after blow, he was able to activate the effect of the sword. The flash of lightning struck the knight so unexpectedly that he did not even understand where it came from. And Mike smiled contentedly, because this was what was needed. The 10% effect from his sword worked just at the right time. Lightning struck the knight's entire body, and although his armor remained almost undamaged, the metal passed the charge well. He spat out blood and fell to the ground, and Michael walked up to him, preparing to finish off his opponent. The guy thought that if the armor had a lightning rod function, it would have added trouble, but fortunately, everything worked out. The knight raised his head, looking at him with big eyes. He realized that the situation had suddenly worsened for him. The stranger tried to get up, but was too weakened after being struck by lightning, so he stopped trying. He thought that he should have won from the start, because he was only facing a challenger from the 5th floor. And Michael said that he was very stupid if he relied entirely on his skill and armor alone. Then he pointed his sword at him, saying that now the time had come for him to know the honor, and he asked him to stop. He said he could answer all his questions, but the guy said there was no need. He plunged his sword straight into his eyes, causing him to die instantly from pain shock, having managed to curse him before doing so. But Michael didn't care about his words. He realized that he had destroyed the intruder, so the task was completed. He also suddenly noticed that each time it became easier for him to kill people, and this was frightening. But if he felt awkward while piercing someone else's flesh, then that would be a much more serious problem. Meanwhile, the system window congratulated him on successfully completing the 5th floor of the test tower. Michael, without thinking twice, absorbed the soul of the stranger from another floor, as it now became clear. His mastery increased to 15%, and the system window reported that he had absorbed the spirit of the challenger, Cade Adrax. Michael thought with surprise that he almost missed this opportunity because for some reason the knight's body began to disappear. Apparently, if you die in another dimension, the body disappears like a mirage, and this was another important discovery. Suddenly, the system window gave a message that the difficulty level and the reward do not match, so the rewards will be changed. Michael looked questioningly at where Cade's body had been a second ago, wondering what his rank was. He then received his first breakthrough reward, a high-ranking 3 absolute skill. As a bonus reward, he received 7,500 points and additionally received another 3,500 points. This made the guy happy. He noticed that instead of the promised second-rank reward, he received a high rank. The invading knight must have been strong enough for the system to think that the rewards and difficulty were not in line. After some time, he returned to the 6th floor waiting room and was healed of all defects and injuries. The guy threw his equipment into his inventory. His shield was broken, but now he was thinking about something else. Michael tried to save his tickets to send questions to the 8th floor as much as possible, but he realized he had to use them. He activated the required command. He had 5 tickets in total, and therefore 5 questions. Michael wanted to know more about the floor penetration and whether it was possible to find out about the impending invasion. When he finished, the system reported that his question had been sent and that an admin would answer it shortly. It took less than 10 seconds for him to receive an answer, and Michael was surprised that it all happened so quickly. But it was even better. He opened the received answer in anticipation of finally sorting out this issue. It said that the floor implementation is a system that allows another candidate to enter the test. However, the gap between them should be no more than 10 floors, and he could only intrude into personal trials. Then Michael realized that, in other words, it was like breaking a ladder while it was climbing. But then a new message appeared saying that this information was not available on his floor. And since the request was only half satisfied, the ticket to submit the question will not be used. It was a little strange for Michael, but nevertheless he was glad that his ticket remained intact. Then the boy thought it was time to use the items he had grabbed from the ground. One of them was the Croken Tower Restoration Chest, which allowed you to restore items. Michael used it to repair his secret hunter shield, making it as good as new in an instant. He then used another item called the Purity Stone, which might seem like a waste of money. But Michael believed that the feeling of freshness and vigor that comes with swimming was worth a couple thousand won. There was an hour and a half left before the 6th floor test, so Michael decided that he could still check the access to the results. But what was his surprise when he saw his nickname in 3rd place, and he had an epic rank. The guy thought that he had climbed quite high from 16th place, and if he continued like this, he would get an achievement. He was not yet aware of the advantages of being a pioneer, but he was getting closer and closer to them. And then he entered the community chat. But what was happening there surprised the guy very much because the atmosphere of the chat had changed. Applicants were looking for opportunities to acquire skills related to murder and robbery. It was clear that people had become selfish towards each other, as everyone was trying to survive and move on. Michael thought that in front of him was literally chaos and disorder. Mental resistance skills, which are now being actively traded, have the effect of reducing mental pain. And then Michael saw a message that made him a little surprised and remember what happened before. Someone in the chat remembered the challenger who released information about the 4th floor, saying that he changed his nickname. It was this man who then voiced the idea of killing each other. And now someone has found out that he has changed his nickname to Judge. Michael wondered if this time the guy was going to do the same thing as on the 4th floor. To begin with, he decided that he should remember this nickname well, and soon it was time for the test. Its theme was occupation. 50 minutes were given for everything, and the condition for successful completion was the capture of a stronghold. Michael entered the portal, wondering what the reward would be this time, since his rank had improved significantly. When he arrived at the testing area, he was surprised to see the sea and sunny weather in front of him. Michael looked around and saw what appeared to be their strongholds that needed to be captured. Suddenly, the system announced the selection of candidates to form teams. But for some reason, there was no one on the pier except Michael, and the guy was a little surprised that no one had shown up. He looked into the portal, but suddenly a spear flew out of it straight at Michael's head, which he definitely didn't expect. However, he managed to intercept the weapon before it hit him, and its owner was expected to appear soon. The guy who was holding on to him appeared literally the next second, so Michael had to step back. Seeing that someone had grabbed his weapon, the guy looked at Michael in surprise, continuing to fly. He finally landed and Michael asked him what he was doing when he had just attacked his own team. But the guy called him a brat, saying that he should also know what's what if he came into the community. After all, it said that killing was the easiest way to get achievements. Then, Michael asked if the main thing for them was to earn as many achievements as possible. To this, his new comrade replied that the guy should look around before playing the role of a righteous man. Michael decided to do just that and saw what the challenger was talking about, as other teams were also killing their members. It was a terrible sight. People went crazy in pursuit of achievements to earn as much as possible. Seeing the whole picture, Michael lowered his head a little and also took out his weapon, approaching the guy. Suddenly, he called him a hypocritical idiot, and he suddenly realized that now he had a new battle ahead of him. Meanwhile, other players continued to hunt each other, killing their comrades. But there seemed to be some who were disgusted by this bloodshed. Right now, two people got their hands on them. One of them, a plump guy, was glad to have met a man who shared his opinion. He thought that everyone else should come to their senses because, at this rate, they would all die here. But the one he was shaking hands with suddenly took out his sword and pierced the guy in the stomach, agreeing with his words. He was surprised that the guy shook hands with strangers without a drop of doubt, without even really understanding the situation. By killing his teammate, he earned the Vile Killer achievement and his durability increased by 1. This battle took place right before Michael's eyes, and in the meantime, his comrade also spoke to him. He told him to stop acting like a saint because he himself wanted to achieve a new achievement. But Michael didn't answer him, and the guy thought that he was distracted, which meant it was a great moment to attack. He swung, intending to kill him, but Michael remained standing motionless until the very end. And only when the guy's blade was already near his eyes, he suddenly made a lightning-fast maneuver and pierced him first. The guy spat out blood, amazed at the speed of his opponent, who could have been his partner. Before his death, he regretted his decision, and Michael received the Traitor achievement, and his strength increased by 1. He himself thought that it was weak, because this was not the kind of test he was hoping for when he entered the portal. But at the same time, this test could be called a kind of event especially for him. After all, here he will be able to improve the mastery of his unique characteristic and perhaps get new skills. However, he decided not to specifically attack other contenders, but only to fight those who did so first. The guy with black hair activated a new technique he had learned, an iron dome made of water. From the outside, she looked quite impressive, but the main thing was not that, but his personal abilities. After all, for him it was an ideal test, because he had mastered water magic to perfection. However, suddenly the guy heard someone rapidly approaching him and turned around. It was Michael, who for some reason was simply running towards the guy, clearly not with friendly intentions. He pushed off the ground and hung in the air for a moment, choosing the best place to attack. There was determination and complete confidence in his actions in his eyes, and the guy noticed it. He was surprised that he was aiming at his iron dome, because the water in it was spinning incredibly fast. However, Michael actually planned to split this technique and landed right on the dome. Seeing that he had failed, the guy said maliciously that it was an impenetrable defense. Imagine his surprise. Michael suddenly broke through the top of the dome and flew straight at him. He kicked the guy and then finished him off with one precise blow of his sword, and he only managed to spit out blood. His dome dispersed, and the guy himself fell unconscious not far from Michael, who landed safely. He thought that maybe his actions were a little cruel, but what mattered was the end result. With his actions, he instilled fear in the other candidates, who began to think of him as a monster. He had just captured the stronghold that was the target of the test, and now all that was left was to defend it. He had to hold out for only 10 minutes, preventing anyone from capturing the point in the remaining time. Michael thought that breaking through this test would be easier than he thought, since the challengers were mostly low-ranking. The tests on the 6th floor made me think about many things because they revealed the essence of a person. Distrust of other people, darkness and despondency, nurtured by the Tower of Trials, and also hatred and the desire for power. You think that sympathy is real hypocrisy, because even if he managed to drive away his rivals from himself, eventually someone was going to die anyway. The system window gave a message that an enemy had joined him. He looked back and saw 4 people stepping into his stronghold together. One of them, a tall blonde man, said that the guy must want to know why there were 4 of them. But Michael replied that even without his explanation, everything was as obvious as it could be, because they were just 4 idiots. Gathering together, they formed a squad of assassins to earn more achievements. The blonde happily agreed, saying that he had grasped the essence, and now his sentence would be carried out. He suddenly became serious, telling the guy to die, and after these words, his comrades rushed to the attack. He noticed the fat man had a bucket of water, which surprised him, and the other guy was moving quite quickly and unpredictably. Michael prepared to defend himself, taking a stance, but the next moment his hand seemed to be pierced by a sword. It turned out that the guy who stayed with the blonde used the Fusion of Hearts technique. It was his unique characteristic, and through its use, Michael now shared his pain. Taking advantage of this, the guy drew his sword and swung it to strike, but he was aiming at himself. And then he pierced his own hand, which made him wince in pain. But it bothered Michael more. Due to the unexpected pain, he dropped his sword and now could not defend himself from the two attacking guys. Things were bad, so he activated the pain tolerance skill and all types of pain decreased by 15%. But the very next moment, a big guy with a bucket of water approached him, which surprised Michael at first. He poured it on the guy, and he was convinced that it was ordinary seawater because the sea surrounded them. Only then a message appeared that he touched the water from the 6th floor, and his strength decreased by 10. The same was true for agility and endurance, and the penalty duration was 3 minutes. Michael realized that in this test the seawater was not easy, and touching it would result in a penalty. Meanwhile, his opponents had almost reached the distance where any attack would pass and hit him. It was a terrible situation for Michael, but he knew that only an ordinary player would have failed in this situation. After all, he himself had long since surpassed the boundaries of human capabilities and possessed incredible skills. The first to attack was a guy who moved unpredictably, which could not be said about his attack. Michael dodged her without much difficulty, saying that he had to admit, the boys had come up with a pretty good strategy. However, he added that they had made one very serious mistake, and he reached out to the face of the first of them. After all, they had chosen the wrong enemy, and with these words he hit his head on the floor of the strong point. Michael did this with surprising strength, considering that his strength was limited by the penalty. For the guy, it was instant death, and his 3 comrades froze in surprise, amazed at Michael's strength. In the meantime, he received a new skill, Contempt for the Weak, as well as the achievement One-Hit Kill. The new skill allowed him to increase his strength if the enemy's stats were lower than his own. Just at that moment, another of the 4 pounced on him, pouring water on him, and all his stats were lowered. Thus, Michael's new skill was activated, and he attacked the big guy first. He kneed him in the head, causing the boy's nose to bleed, but Michael didn't stop there. He jumped up and brought his foot down on his face, smashing it completely, and blood splattered everywhere. After this, he received a concussion, from which he died, and Michael received the achievement of Merciless Killer. His agility increased by 1, but there were still 2 challengers he couldn't deal with. The blonde, who was watching all this, grimaced in displeasure. He didn't expect the guy to be so strong. Michael, meanwhile, walked straight towards him without saying a word. He looked him straight in the eyes. The boy who used heart fusion looked at the blonde with confusion, asking what they should do now. Instead of answering, he suddenly swung his sword and hit his comrade right in the leg. He screamed in pain, but it was transmitted to Michael too, who grimaced from the unpleasant sensation. He dropped to one knee, thinking that the blonde wanted to finish off both him and his comrade at the same time. Fortunately, his pain was limited by the effect, but it limited his actions. Meanwhile, the blonde took aim at his comrade again, this time intending to finish him off. He started stabbing him with his sword, and Michael felt half of the pain on himself. The other guy screamed. The blonde turned to Michael, saying that if he took another step towards him, he would slit the idiot's throat. Michael understood that even with pain tolerance, it would be difficult for him to react to the enemy's attacks. So, as expected, upon hearing it, there was only one answer, which again included murder. After all, he must kill the challenger who activated the fusion of hearts as quickly as possible. With that thought, Michael threw his shield, putting all his strength into it, and it turned back into a flying axe. As a result, he cut the guy's throat, which only caused him to think that he was dying, and then he died. Michael himself also felt quite a lot of pain in his neck, but fortunately the skill helped him cope with it. He dropped to his knees, coughing up blood, and the blonde realized that he was now vulnerable to attack. The guy swung, thinking that if not now, there would be no other chance, and pounced on Michael. He continued to stand motionless on his knees, waiting for him to get close enough. And when the blonde was almost at his head, about to cut it off, Michael suddenly grabbed his sword. He stopped him literally a centimeter from his nose, asking if the guy wanted to die first. The blonde chuckled something unintelligible and then said that Michael had simply gone crazy, which was not far from the truth. He applied even more force and suddenly tore the blade of the sword right out of the blonde's hands. Before he could even blink, the weapon was in Michael's hands, after which he cut off his head. It happened incredibly quickly, and he earned the Cold-Blooded Slasher achievement, receiving 1,500 points. And then the system window notified everyone that the test time was up. Michael's stronghold had been captured. This meant that everyone who had managed the same thing had survived and moved on. But there was another observation here. In the end, the ultimate winners were those who kept their team and comrades together. Of course, there were exceptions. Michael looked around and saw many people like him. Those who killed others, and it doesn't matter if they were his comrades or just other contenders. The guy wondered how he looked in the eyes of those who did not stoop to murder and kept their team together. He was probably just as much of a monster as the guys who attacked him at the end of the test. As a reward, he received 8,000 points, as well as a rank 1 random draw box, which went into his inventory. After this, a portal opened and Michael successfully returned to the 7th floor waiting room again. Before this, he did not forget to absorb the souls of the guys he killed, having previously learned all the information about them. Thanks to this, the rank of his unique characteristic increased by 1 level and was now rank 3. When Michael moved to the waiting room, a new feature for viewing achievements was activated. A list opened in front of him, in which he could see all his achievements received in the tower. Among them was even an epic class, which he received for the achievement First Return. He then decided to take a closer look at each achievement and found that some of them immediately granted new skills. Some also came with stat boosts, while others awarded points, all of which he had in his arsenal. Michael was surprised that he actually received quite a few achievements for killing, even though he hadn't planned to commit them. He then opened his inventory, where the rank 1 random draw box had already been moved. By opening it, he could get a random item from rank 5 to rank 1, so there was no point in delaying. Michael didn't have much hope for this reward and wanted to finish it as soon as possible so he could move on to absorbing souls. He pulled the yellow ribbon that tied it, and the box opened. Something quickly flew out from there, and the guy followed this object, becoming more and more surprised. It turned out to be some small monster that landed nearby and looked at him. Michael asked the system what kind of Pokemon it was, assuming he needed to catch it, and the monster stared at him. Then the boy pounced on him, reaching out to grab the creature, but it turned out to be agile. He dodged Michael's hands without any difficulty and looked as if he was playing with him for fun. Michael chased after him for some time, but all attempts to catch this creature came to naught. But finally, he managed to grab the monster with both hands, and it seemed that he did not expect this. Michael was delighted, saying that now he would not let him go, but still did not foresee that the creature was not domestic. Suddenly, it bit him on the hand, which caused the guy a little pain because the monster's teeth were sharp. This made him let go, although the guy didn't plan it, but his hand unclenched instinctively. When the monster jumped back again, Michael said in a creepy voice that he had been polite to him so far, because he was quite cute. However, now he could not expect mercy. With these words, he attacked the creature with renewed strength. For some time, the monster managed to shorten further, but then the guy suddenly jumped away from him. He pushed off the ceiling and then flew at the creature with incredible speed, swinging his arm to strike. He was no longer able to dodge this because it was too late, so the blow hit him straight in the head. The monster's eyes rolled back into their sockets, and its head suddenly turned red and, as Michael noticed, cracked. And then something happened that he never expected. The creature disintegrated into many porcelain pieces. Michael saw a beautiful necklace appear from them. It was said that he had received a rank 1 item. It was a wrought iron pendant, a steel pendant imbued with the soul of the blacksmith who had worked with it all his life. It increased the effects of metallurgy and swordsmanship skills by 7%, and also had a special property. When possessing mana, an exclusive effect was activated, Steel Protection. This effect was that his skin absorbed 10% of all physical damage. Michael realized that this was a really cool item, as it was equipped with both attack and defense. The guy thought he didn't expect anything from this prank, but ended up winning such a big jackpot. However, when he put on the pendant to test its power, the system window reported that his mana was depleted. Then he realized that this effect was very cool, but the price for it was his mana, which from now on had to be stored. Now Michael decided to check the rank of the unique characteristic status, which increased by 1 rank. But then suddenly a message from the system appeared, asking if he was ready to proceed with the 7th floor test. This surprised Michael a little, because usually the time before the test was announced first. He wanted to check if this was the case for other participants. So he went into the community, where he confirmed his suspicions. And so it was. Now everyone could proceed to the next test without waiting for the others. But there was still an atmosphere of desperation in the community to return home. So everyone was a little indifferent to the fact that the waiting time was gone, but Michael noticed something else. The manner of communication in the chat also changed. Now people were increasingly discussing people who betrayed their comrades. Michael was sure that all these maniacs had gone quiet now because the 7th floor test would be personal again. But one had to be wary of those who used the lives of their comrades simply as tools to gain achievements. And most importantly, Michael must develop his skills so that they become unshakable to any variables. Then, the guy finally checked his stats window and saw a new additional effect. Now he could use the souls of the dead to protect his body, but at this time his energy would be proportional to the force of the blow. The guy also noticed that the description of the basic effect was now more specific, which surprised him. After all, if previously the main emphasis was on strengthening stats, now souls could be used differently. He could use them both as a magical power and as a protective shell. Michael thought that anything could happen, so the ability to protect the body would never be superfluous. With this thought, he suddenly took out his sword from his inventory because he decided to try everything on himself. Throwing the blade into the air, he went to check how effective the spiritual shield would be. Michael held out his hand, deciding to take a risk because even if the sword cut it off, the waiting room would heal everything. The blade, meanwhile, continued to spin, rapidly approaching his hand. And then, when the weapon was about to touch his flesh, the effect of his characteristic suddenly worked. The system window reported that the soul of a guy named John Flock absorbed the damage from the attack and disappeared. He was left with 3 of the 30 souls in his possession, and Michael thought the defense had exceeded his expectations. After all, she had acted quickly, without allowing the slightest harm to be done to him, so it was possible to draw a new conclusion from this. It's better not to absorb all the souls at once, but to always have a couple in reserve for your own protection. After that, Michael opened the board with the results of the 6th floor test, wanting to see his progress. To his surprise, he dropped to 4th position, but for him this was not at all critical. After all, to receive the title of Pioneer, he only needs to be among the top 50. Having finished with this, Michael stretched his body a little, saying how tired he was while checking this and that. But he had no time to waste, and he decided to challenge the next floor without delay. The next moment, a portal opened, and the theme of this test was proof. He had to pass 3 tests in 40 minutes, otherwise the challenger would face death. But for successfully completed tasks, a new skill of Grace of the Wind, of the highest rank, was given. When he arrived, he realized that he was in some kind of corridor with an unusual atmosphere. There was literally no sense of anyone's presence here, and this irritated the guy a little. Suddenly, he felt the energy around him change, and the system informed him that he had entered the first zone. This was the first testing area where he had to prove that he had overcome his fears. He was suddenly transported to the desert where he began his growth, and it was here that his first fight took place. Michael had already guessed what was about to happen, and as if to confirm his words, the ground beneath him began to shake. And then he appeared, the sand golem, this time much larger and apparently stronger. The guy realized that this space was now a reproduction of the training test. The condition for successful completion was to break through 3 tests in the remaining time. Michael realized that as he fought the golem, 3 more trials would appear. He probably overcame them at one time, but since this is a test proof, it will need to be done again. Meanwhile, he finally saw the golem that stood before him. Its size was truly impressive. Michael thought that his size had increased by about 3 times, but it didn't play a big role for the guy. The golem, meanwhile, pulled its hand out of the sand and prepared to attack, swinging at the guy standing in front of it. The monster did look huge, but Michael didn't even flinch when it started to act. Michael, out of habit, pulled out his inventory from the system storage, preparing for another fight. And then the golem struck. Michael managed to jump back, but noticed that the golem's speed was quite good. He waited for him to attack again, then jumped onto his hand and ran forward, looking for the core. From his last fight with this monster, he remembered that the core was near its hand, so he headed there. But this time, there was nothing there, and Michael decided to stick to his original plan, aiming for the head. And yet it was strange that he didn't see the golem's core anywhere, and that was precisely where its weak spot was. Then the guy had a hunch that the more massive the golem, the deeper the core was hidden in its body. And then the monster attacked again. This time its movements became even faster and caught the guy by surprise. Michael was surprised that the sand could move so precisely, so he had to come up with a plan quickly. The golem's hand appeared before his eyes so suddenly that Michael didn't have time to jump away. The monster then clenched his fist, intending to crush the guy like a bug, but he failed. Suddenly, he felt something vibrate strongly in his hand, and then he felt cuts. Michael had freed himself from the sand trap, shredding his palm from the inside, and was now free again. He thought that since he couldn't strip the monster with one blow, he would just cut it into pieces. The next moment, he put his words into action and pounced on the golem, attacking its entire body. The guy chopped off his head and arms, inflicted wounds on his body and legs, so he thought that would be enough. However, he realized that each time he was cutting only sand, which was immediately replenished with new sand. Therefore, at any cost, he had to find the core, and besides, his tactics had enraged the golem. He swung at the guy again, and Michael had to go on the defensive again, jumping away from him. But suddenly, After another attack, he noticed something interesting that he had not noticed before. He had no time to think because the monster was going to finish him off again, this time by stepping on him with its foot. The guy quickly ran away from that place, amazed at how quickly and accurately the golem attacked. He suddenly realized that dodging the blow was not a problem, but if he got caught by that sand wave, then it could all end quite tragically because sand is nature, not a monster, so there is no point in fighting it. Michael ran as fast as he could, hoping to get far enough away from the wave, but she was approaching mercilessly, and the guy realized that he would not be able to get out of her way no matter how hard he tried. And so it happened. Heaps of sand buried him completely, as if he had drowned in a sea of sand. A kind of gorge was formed, in which Michael lay under sand debris. Michael was irritated by this. He realized that at this rate he could fail the test simply because of the time. Meanwhile, the golem continued to advance, although he himself was walking towards him. But the sand made everything much more difficult. Michael drew his sword and prepared to defend himself, intending to pinpoint the exact location of the core this time. The golem was still going to crush him and had already extended its hands to do so, but this time the guy did not run away. He used his new skill, 3 absolutes, which allowed him to enhance 3 sword attacks. To do this, it was necessary to use one's mana, and as an additional effect, the power of the sword was increased. Michael activated the skill and rushed to attack. This time his blows really became stronger. He was able to completely cut off the golem's arm with one blow and then began to shred its torso. Michael was surprised to notice that he suddenly had such strength, but it was just in time. He remembered how angry he had been the first time he had encountered a floor implant during a test. But now he could not help thinking that he should thank the knight for invading his presence. Although this vile golem was being restored by the sand, it still continued to deliver slashing blows. The guy did this with one single goal: to find the core and destroy it, so he attacked without stopping. The initiative was already clearly on his side, because the golem did nothing but recover after his attacks. Michael felt like he had already cut his entire body, but for some reason he still hadn't found the core. This was already starting to piss the guy off because this could go on forever, and he only had 30 minutes left. But suddenly Michael made an interesting and slightly strange discovery for himself. He asked when the golem had become so cute, since before that it had been much bigger. Hearing that he was called cute, the golem's cheeks turned red. Apparently even the monsters enjoyed the compliments. But it seems that the sand that makes up his body cannot be extracted from the environment indefinitely. That's why it decreased in size. Michael had already figured out what to do in this new situation. He smiled evilly, turning to the golem and asked if it wanted to lose a little more weight. The monster didn't really like the offer and he shouted something in response, but the guy didn't understand his shouts. He pounced on him again, and the golem had no choice but to attack back. He swung his fist at the guy again, but he still didn't realize that these attacks were already useless. Michael easily cut his arm and continued to cut the sandy body without stopping. The guy did this with such incredible speed that it became increasingly difficult for the golem to recover. Soon he fell down, his legs and body were eaten away and his hands were cut off. He was immobilized. This time Michael decided to wait until he was back on his feet, and now he looked much smaller. To be more precise, he looked the same as the first time the boy fought him in the training trial. But this also meant that he could now clearly see the golem's core, just like the first time. It was on his back, and since the body was covered with a thick layer of sand, it became extremely difficult to get to it. Michael also thought that he should have sped up, since he only had 40 minutes for the test. The guy had about half an hour left, but the golem itself approached him, moving, however, faster. Of course, this didn't catch Michael by surprise, but he noticed that after the intensive diet, the monster became more agile. It was a bit funny, but the guy added that he didn't have time, otherwise he would be happy to play with him some more. In the blink of an eye, he suddenly appeared behind the monster and swung to smash its core. The golem felt something sharp pierce his body and screamed, then began to crumble. Still, if it weren't for the core, golems would be very insidious opponents, but fortunately, each has its own weak spot. The sand golem's core was destroyed, the system window reported this, and then issued 2 more announcements. The first was that challenger Michael Nodford had proven that he had overcome his fear, and the second was that he had completed the first challenge. After some time, only sand remained from the golem, which scattered all around Michael. And then the boy saw the spirit of the golem, which was different from the one he absorbed last time. This one was much brighter and emitted strong energy, so Michael activated his characteristic. However, the guy was unable to absorb his soul because a second portal suddenly opened. He pulled the guy into himself, and the system window displayed a message that he was being transported to the second testing zone. Michael stood there, his hand outstretched, unable to believe that for the first time he had failed to absorb a soul. Apparently, the skill increase here was limited, if possible at all. But then he was transported to the second testing zone, where he was required to prove that he had become wiser. Looking around, the guy realized that he was at the location of the second test in the orc settlement. As he thought, the previous tests were now being repeated. Just like that time, the settlement was burning, and he entered the tent, into which the orc leader had then run. But there was no one there, which surprised him a little. But when he went out, he saw what was what. He realized that the subsequent events of that day were now unfolding before him. After all, he had destroyed the orc settlement, so now the orc rangers who stood before him looked stronger. One of them glanced at the guy, assessing him for a minute, and then suddenly the expression on his face changed. The pupils dilated, and the vision became clouded, and Michael immediately understood what these signs were. The fit of rage was a phenomenon often observed in monsters overcome with anger. The enraged orc was no longer a pathetic monster like a rank 4, so it would be tough. Meanwhile, a similar condition appeared in all the orcs, and they pounced on him together. But suddenly Michael noticed something interesting in their behavior, or rather, he found out the reason for their anger. After all, before this they had bowed over their dead brothers who had fallen by his hand the last time. Michael thought that monsters shouldn't show pain from loss to family members and activated the skills. Suddenly, he too became angry because the orcs were trying to avenge their comrades. This shouldn't have been done in front of him, because he had also lost his parents, so anger overcame him too. He defeated all the orcs, and then turned to their leader, asking if this feeling was not disgusting. Watching your family die and not being able to do anything about it angered the chief orc. With his last strength, he attacked him. But Michael knew that victory was already on his side and drew his sword. He was surprised by how zealously the monster tried to fight until the very end, so he eased its suffering. By cutting off the head of the last orc, he passed the test, thus proving to the system that he had become wiser. However, this was not the end. Michael quickly turned around, thinking that this time there was no time to waste. He wanted to have time to absorb the souls of the killed orcs because there were at least 10 of them. But he failed again. The portal to the next dimension opened literally as soon as he killed the last orc. However, when he was almost inside the portal, he was able to absorb several souls of the orc Jaegers. Mastery of the Hunter's Dagger skill has increased to rank 3, and the instant acceleration skill to rank 3+. And then he entered the final testing area, expecting it to be a mind-blowing experience this time. To his surprise, he found himself in the 6th floor testing location where he had been just this morning. This was the very battlefield where the stronghold had to be captured and held. However, Michael noticed that the layout of the tiles was different, and this time they were made of slippery metal. But there was nothing to be surprised about, since the previous test, so ignorant, had received the label Wisdom. The guy opened his inventory and took out a life potion that increased physical and magical strength by 20%. Without thinking twice, he drank it and immediately felt the effect. His strength was restored. A few seconds later, he stood there wondering what to do with the flask that held the potion he had drunk. And then he decided that he could make a little mess in the Trials Tower and threw the flask straight into the sea. It is not clear whether it was because he did this or for some other reason, but suddenly a wave rose behind him. It was so huge that it knocked down the metal plates and started moving towards the guy, and he realized that things were getting hot and activated the exclusive effect of the killer's cloak. His movement speed increased by 15% for a minute, allowing him to quickly run away. Michael thought that the tests before had repeated the existing rules, so that was the case here too. It turned out that he needed to find and capture a stronghold, and before that, he had to avoid water from the sea. Luckily, his speed was higher, so the wave couldn't catch up with him, or so he thought. Michael decided to just keep moving in the same direction, but suddenly the slab beneath his feet shook. Before the guy could jump to the other one, a large wave lifted him up along with the slab. He lost his balance and fell, and the system reported that he had come into contact with water from the 6th floor. Strength, dexterity, and endurance were immediately reduced by 10, and the penalty lasted for 3 minutes. Michael thought that when the idea of the tiles remaining in the same order, it was a kind of hope that there was at least some common sense in the Tower of Trials. She proved that it was not so. The guy realized that he was going underwater and activated instant acceleration. Pushing off from the tiles, he ran along the remains of the path, no longer afraid of coming into contact with the water. So he managed to run a little more, but the situation was becoming more dangerous. After all, one wrong move and he would have fallen into the sea, and the tiles would have buried him, as if in a grave. Michael couldn't even imagine that it was possible to die so easily in such a place, so he kept moving. Finally, he saw a stronghold that seemed like salvation to him, and the guy headed towards it. The red tile of the stronghold was getting closer and closer, and Michael felt that he was almost there. Soon, finally, this annoying ordeal would end, and this thought gave him strength. However, suddenly the water around the stronghold began to swirl, forming a new wave. Michael thought that now the Tower of Trials had decided to go completely mad and finish him off. He barely managed to react, dodging in time the wave that would have swept him back into the sea. There was only a little bit left to the strong point, and now he could run towards it on the slabs, and not in the air. But suddenly, when there were only a few meters left to the stronghold, the wave took the form of a rotating vortex. It was so unexpected that Michael did not have time to jump aside in time, and the wave's attack caught up with him. He realized with horror that he was going underwater, so he decided to try to use the effects with his last strength. He activated the effect of the Forged Iron Pendant, which absorbed 10% of all physical attacks. Also, the soul of the Orc Ranger, which he was able to appropriate for himself, absorbed the damage inflicted on him and disappeared. This happened twice more, and Michael realized that if it weren't for the improved stat rank, he would already be dead. After all, the guy clearly felt the shockwave, but right before the blow could cause him any damage, the shield blocked it, and thanks to this, Michael was able to return back to the path of slabs. It was pretty close, but he managed to survive, so he continued running towards the stronghold. The waves did not retreat either. Rotating, they followed him, rapidly taming the distance. Then suddenly the effect of the assassin's cloak ended, and he lost his speed. This was very bad for Michael, because his mana was already at 0, and what if the instant acceleration failed? That would definitely be the end for the guy, so he decided to use what was at hand, namely his souls. There were still a few Orc Jaegers left in reserve that he was still able to absorb, and now he ate one of them. Thanks to this, he was able to replenish his mana and felt his strength return. It was just in time. The waves had meanwhile almost reached him and were again approaching from different sides for a new attack. However, Michael returned to his speed and saw that there were less than 3 meters left to the strong point. He overcame the last slabs and was about to jump onto the red slab of the point, when suddenly he saw an obstacle. The last plate was lifted into the air by the shockwave that hit from below and created an obstacle. Seeing this, Michael was surprised and even a little scared because he was losing time, and for him every second was precious. He couldn't retreat either because the same water trap awaited him there, so there was only one option left. It was a test where he had to prove that he had overcome his doubts, and the guy understood what to do. Relying entirely on luck, he continued running straight towards the wall of water in front of him. When he entered her, he felt an incredibly powerful wave flow tearing his body apart. But, fortunately, he was saved again by another soul of an Orc Ranger, absorbing the damage, and he was able to get out of the water trap. The only thing he didn't calculate was that the force of the current threw him high into the air. Although he was flying in the direction of the red plate, the altitude was high enough to be fatal. Michael screamed, thinking that this could end very sadly, so he completely relied on the effects. The slab was already right in front of his eyes, and when he fell, he broke it a little from the great force with which he flew. As expected, the orc's soul saved him this time too, and it turned out to be the second to last one in his arsenal. Michael lay there for a moment with his eyes wide open, surprised that the ordeal had been so difficult. He was not even able to stand up on his feet, and the waves were hanging over him, and the guy was seriously scared. However, the system window reported the task had been successfully completed, saying that he had proven that he had overcome his doubts. After this, the waves stopped rotating, forming a vortex, and turned into ordinary water. All this fell upon Michael, and he thought that finally this damn test was over. As a reward for his breakthrough, he received a new high-level skill, Wind's Grace, and 15,000 points. He also saw a message that rank 2+ speed boots would be sent to his inventory as a bonus reward. Then a portal appeared and Michael entered it, returning to the waiting room, now on the 8th floor. When he returned, the guy thought that this time he was unexpectedly close to failure, but he still managed. In the current situation, it was much more alarming for him to return to the 8th floor. He thought that he couldn't continue to be so lucky, but suddenly a message from the system appeared. It announced the expansion, as the number of applicants who passed the tests on the 7th floor exceeded 1,000. Then he read that some kind of intersection point was created in the test, and the floor implantation system was activated. But the most important thing that everyone was waiting for with such impatience was the permanent return to Earth. And the icing on the cake was a message stating that he was among the pioneers. Now he could choose the Halo. an advantage that could only be obtained by maintaining the title of pioneer. Michael also read that the halo affects the unique characteristics and skills of the applicant. There were 3 halos to choose from: ruler, hunter, and monk, and Michael thought about it. First, he had to read the description of each of them and then make his choice. The ruler had varied performance and was well suited to his current rank. It affected all skills and even the unique characteristic, and also had a special power: skill synthesis. Besides, the trial tower openly said that it was the most suitable halo for him. Then he became familiar with the hunter's halo, which was closely related to improving characteristics and stats. His unique power was leveling up, and it also suited Michael perfectly at the moment. The last one was the monarch, but here everything depended on talent, which the guy did not possess, so he immediately discarded this option. It turned out that he had to make a choice in favor of the remaining 2 halos, but he didn't know which one. After some thought, he decided that the best choice would be to go with the halo, which had more emphasis on height. The system window confirmed his choice of the ruler aura, and its special effect triggered the evolution of the unique characteristic. The options were sorted by the current abilities of the applicant. There were 3 available in total, but Michael didn't even think about which effect to choose because he decided everything at once when he saw the first option. He chose the summoner effect, which allowed him to absorb spirits to revive his assistants. These were supposed to be powerful skeletal undead, and Michael thought that such help would not hurt. After some time, his body got used to the new effect, and then a message appeared that the halo had been successfully created. The guy decided to look at his stats after these transformations, and also read about his unique power. Skill synthesis allowed 2 necessary skills to be combined into one, which helped create new effects. Michael decided to test this power right away and opened the list of his skills, of which there were only 7. He thought about what he should combine, and then chose Contempt for the Weak and Continuing the Battle. Both skills were level 5, and he hardly used them, so he confirmed the continuation of the synthesis. After some time, the process was completed, and he received a corresponding notification. And then he saw the result, which was a new skill created based on the ones he had chosen. This skill was called Forced Breakthrough, and what was also noteworthy was that it was rank 3. Its effect was that Michael could break through unknown forms of containment. However, his magic level must be higher than the magic level of the one sending the restraining effects on him. Michael thought it was a really mind-blowing skill that made a lot of things easier. He liked how the new unique power worked and decided to try again. This time he chose Ranger Training and Burn Resistance. Both skills were also level 5. The guy froze in anticipation, thinking that the system would not disappoint him this time either. And so it happened. The new skill was called Strong Eye. It was level 4 and consisted of the fact that it could provide good visibility. This worked especially well in poor conditions, and his vision became sharper. But Michael was curious as to why he got rank 4 this time. He thought the previous skills were combined better. Based on this, it could be assumed that the combination of skills also played an important role in the synthesis. After that, he closed all the windows and fell on the bed, because he was very tired from the long battles. Michael thought he had already gone from holding the status of a pioneer to receiving the Halo Award. But for some reason he felt a little wounded, as if he had achieved everything not through his own efforts. He lay there for a while longer, lost in thought, and then suddenly jumped out of bed, saying that it was time to get back to work. After all, he didn't get acquainted with another new skill that he received for completing the 7th floor. According to the description, the skill gave +10 to all speeds if you said its name. But there was a nuance. Michael could use it a total of 7 times and increase his speed to 70%. But after that, there would be a 24-hour cooldown. However, Michael was blinded by the thought that his speed would increase by as much as 70%, and he would be able to dodge any attack. Besides, this skill didn't consume any mana at all, so it was very useful and the guy liked it. In essence, Wind's Grace was a skill that had no downsides, and that was good news. Michael then opened his inventory to check his latest bonus, the rank 2+ speed boots. Michael noticed that all the rewards on the 7th floor were related to speed, since the boots also increased it. The guy then opened the skill shop, which displayed all the effects available for purchase. Among them were Enhancement, Steadfastness, Monster Skin, Enchanted Weapons, Instant Acceleration, and others. Michael thought that, contrary to his expectations, the quality of the skill shop left much to be desired. However, he needed a skill related to magic, so he bought a magic chain for 15,000 points. He also acquired magic resistance for 12,000 points. Both skills were rank 3, which already gave him hope. The last skill had the effect of resistance to other people's magic, and was also increased by the chain. Michael thought that now that he had these two skills, he would be able to withstand attacks like heart fusion. He also won't be caught off guard by someone else's magic unless it's an incredibly powerful technique. The magic chain skill had the effect of condensing magic into a chain, increasing the efficiency of mana usage. And then suddenly Michael felt his whole body burning, and the system reported the formation of circuits. It was even a little painful, but the guy understood that thanks to these chains he would be able to increase his mana. It all ended as suddenly as it had begun, and soon he was able to sit on the bed again. Michael stood up and felt a strange lightness throughout his body, as if he weighed a few grams. The guy decided not to waste time and start testing his new abilities. He moved a little further, to the middle of the room, and stood there for a while, lost in thought. And then he suddenly swung his leg, intending to kick it straight into the floor even though it made no sense. But Michael wanted to test how strong he had become with his skills, and the effect of the blow surprised him. He realized that mana, when used randomly, would form a chain and enhance his physical abilities. As expected, he made a good purchase, and this pleased Michael because the glasses were not obtained without difficulty. A minute later, he was already reading again in more detail about his new effect, thanks to which he could summon souls. Moreover, the abilities of the summoned dead man will correspond to the number of souls in his arsenal. Now, all that remained was to make a decision on which his further progress depended. The choice was whether to challenge the next floor or return back to the ground. Meanwhile, some guy posted an ad for recruitment to the team. He needed 2 more people. He sat on a bench in the memorial park where an emergency portal had appeared, but there were no people willing to join it. Suddenly, 3 people approached him, apparently another team. Their commander laughed at him. He noticed that he hadn't assembled a team yet, so he should have given the portal entry permission to them. But the guy wasn't going to share his pass with anyone. He said he didn't intend to give it to others. Then the fat man noticed that there were quite a few hunters gathered in the park, but for some reason no one wanted to join his team. And then he said that in that case they had no choice but to take the pass by force. He added, "Does the guy really think that anyone would want to be on the same team with trash like him?" Some of the hunters in the park agreed with him, saying the guy had hit the nail on the head. But suddenly, to everyone's surprise, they all heard someone ask the guy if he had received any more people. Everyone turned to see who said it, and he headed towards the guy who was sitting on the bench. Michael showed his second-rank hunter ID, and this already inspired some respect for his person. He asked the guy who was recruiting people for the team if that was enough to join. He was a little shocked by the appearance of such a strong hunter, so he simply nodded his head. However, this did not please the big guy, who asked if he could not see that there was a line of people waiting. Michael just smiled at this, which provoked the guy even more, and he squeezed his shoulder. Then Michael said that if he was unhappy with something, he should have just applied to James's team. That was the name of the guy who got the pass into the portal, and then Michael added that the big guy should leave him alone. He told him to remove his hand from his shoulder before he broke it and activated his powerful aura. The boy was shocked by how strong this hunter was, but his hand still squeezed his shoulder. He himself was also a rank 2 hunter, but now he doubted that the guy standing in front of him had the same rank. Meanwhile, his partners thought that it was their commander who was radiating such powerful energy and were delighted. But he replied that it was not his doing, and then said that this time he would tolerate such a prank from Michael. As he left, he added that he should know that he was simply lucky, because representatives from the hunting association were there. But Michael didn't care about him. He was watching James, who was upset that everything had gone wrong. Then he decided to cheer the guy up, saying that he wouldn't be able to find anyone for the team anyway. Therefore, they should not waste any more time and go into the portal together because their strength would be enough. But James didn't seem to be convinced, and asked again if Michael was really going to handle everything with just him. He answered positively, and soon they were the first to enter the portal, which took them to some kind of dungeon. James immediately rushed to look around the area, not believing his eyes that he had gotten inside. Apparently, this was his first portal. But Michael said that he didn't need to worry too much. After all, he himself will be able to deal with most of the third-rank monsters, so the guy doesn't have to worry. Then the guy asked if Michael hadn't said before that it was his first time in the dungeon too. The guy added that he should listen to him carefully because their lives were at stake. He suddenly asked Michael who he thought had the highest mortality rate in the dungeon, rank 4 or rank 2 hunters. James continued, saying that at first glance it might seem like the 4th-rank hunter would die first. However, in reality, a rank 2 hunter has a higher mortality rate because they are too confident in their abilities. Therefore, the probability of a fatal outcome for rank 2 hunters is extremely high. The same can be said about driving. The more confident the driver, the higher the chance of getting into an accident, so the dungeon was quite a dangerous place. And since Michael had risked entering here without a tank and a healer, James became even more concerned about his self-confidence. Suddenly, the guy asked if he could take on the role of leader of their group, because he knew everything about the dungeons. Michael noted that he actually wanted to stand at the head of their small group, but he still agreed. James bowed to him, thanking him for his trust, adding that he was doing this for everyone's safety. And then they continued on their way. Michael decided for himself that he would take the initiative into his own hands if the guy couldn't cope. After some time, they saw the first monster of the dungeon, a lizardman, who also noticed them. James reported that these monsters are known for their skillful use of various types of weapons. The guy said that he would first draw all his attention to himself, and Michael would have to attack from behind. Michael was also curious how a fairly experienced hunter would fight such a creature. The lizardman charged at James, this time wielding a long sword that looked more like a spear. The boy also drew his sword, but for some reason he swung his sword too early to attack. As Michael noticed, James continued to swing his sword in the air, and even the lizard man didn't understand what he was doing. Michael wondered if they were testing their strength of spirit, because if so, it would be some time before it was over. The temporary return to Earth only takes 3 days, but at this rate, it will end faster for him. With this thought, he put on his shield and took his sword in his hands, which attracted James's attention, and he was surprised. Michael said that he had to intervene now, but the guy protested, saying that he couldn't do that. He wanted to add that it was dangerous to interfere with the fight, but Michael had already activated instant acceleration. With lightning speed, he pounced on the lizard man and cut off his head, leaving James in shock. He even opened his mouth a little in surprise, asking what just happened, and Michael answered him. He apologized for disobeying the order, but said he had to intervene because he was in a bit of a hurry. James replied that he understood him perfectly, and then Michael asked if he could make one more suggestion. After the guy responded positively, he said that from now on he would like to take on the role of leader. However, he proved it. In the end, they encountered the lizard men again. James didn't even have to do anything. Michael killed the monsters one after another, just like on the floors of the Tower of Trials where he came from. Suddenly, 2 lizard men attacked him from behind, but the boy was able to notice their attack in time. He jumped up and lingered on the ceiling of the dungeon, forcing the monsters to look for him. And then he landed on one of them, piercing him with his sword straight through the stomach, causing instant death. James was amazed at the skills his temporary partner had. After all, he literally fought all the monsters alone, not allowing himself to be harmed. One after another, the lizard men attacked him, but none of them had yet managed to injure the guy even a little. Michael spared no effort to ensure a quality fight, wanting each of the monsters to die by his hand. James, meanwhile, thought that perhaps he was now witnessing the battle of a super newbie. Michael cut open the stomach of one of the lizardmen and pulled out a mana stone containing a quiet, murky magic. Depending on its use, it could prove of great help in metallurgy or chemistry. So Michael collected all the stones from the slain lizardman and asked James to be his porter. Suddenly, another lizardman pounced on him, this one moving much faster and more agile than the previous ones. Apparently, he was waiting for Michael to let his guard down and be unable to block his attack. However, everything turned out completely differently. The guy was able to pierce his stomach with one precise blow. After this, the monster did not get up, but when he fell to the ground, he did so with a loud bang. The noise caused a small amount of debris to fall directly on Michael's head, but he protected himself. James was also swinging, but he looked a little scared, because this was the first time he had come into contact with the dungeon debris. Michael suggested talking to him later, as it was extremely dangerous to let his guard down now. Michael then pretended to yawn, but in reality he was absorbing the souls of all the lizard men he had killed. For each mastery, his unique characteristic increased by 0.07%, which was very little. He thought that at this rate, he would have to work hard to improve it in any way. But suddenly they saw a new portal in front of them, and James said that they had found the boss's room. The guy added that he couldn't even imagine that they would be able to get here, because it was an indicator of skill. It seemed to him that the man in front of him, that is Michael, was capable of carrying out a complete clearing of the dungeon. Michael himself, meanwhile, asked if he would be okay with joining the boss's team right now. James replied that he didn't mind, saying only that perhaps Michael should take a little break. But he replied that there was no need for this, and they entered the portal. Seeing the uninvited guests, the Lizard Man King stood up, preparing to finish off anyone who came near him. James asked what they were going to do, and Michael replied that he needed to think about it for a bit, which excited the guy. After all, he thought he had some kind of plan, But Michael was acting according to the situation, and now they had to go on the defensive. The Lizard Man King decided to pounce on them first, and Michael thought with a smile on his face that it was just in time. The monster had two weapons in both hands, which allowed him to quickly attack and defend. Michael still used the instant acceleration skill, so he was also not inferior in speed. However, the reflexes and reaction speed of the Lizardman King, given his size, amazed the guy. Only Michael thought that no matter how hard he tried, he would not be able to get closer to him. After all, he was still not fast enough for Michael to match his fighting pace. In an instant, he found himself behind the boss and swung his blade for the first attack. However, to his surprise, the Lizard Man was able to not only reflect the attack, but also hit him back with his tail. The force of his blow was so great that the guy was thrown straight into the rocks, and this was not good. James clutched his head, thinking that the Master Hunter might not survive after this, although he hoped that was not the case. Luckily, Michael's damage absorption effect with Spirit kicked in, and he remained unharmed. Now he decided to act more carefully. But at the same time, it was a good way to test new skills. The Lizardman King was surprised that the boy not only survived, but was also standing on his feet again. Michael addressed him, saying that, unfortunately, not even a single stone remained of his throne. He asked if this seemed like an ominous omen to him, and, strangely enough, the boss understood him. Suddenly, he activated magic and his power instantly increased. And then something strange happened. The monster suddenly screamed furiously and released a bright purple beam from its mouth. This was its skill. Michael then saw a message from the system that he had been subjected to the Wave of Vengeance skill, and his speed had been reduced by 25%. However, the guy did not plan to give in to his opponent in speed and decided to use his trump card. He activated Force Breakthrough, and since his magic level was higher than the boss's, the slow effect disappeared. Seeing this, the Lizardman King was even more surprised, and now he felt a little uneasy. And Michael thought that the breakthrough skill was the result of synthesis, so he had doubts about it. However, its effectiveness was very high, and as a result, it was able to block the enemy's skill. Suddenly, he heard the voice of James, who fell to his knees because his body did not obey him. The boy turned to Michael for help, and he suddenly realized that it was the boss's doing. He looked at Michael with interest, as if asking what he would do now. And then he rushed towards James, which made Michael act even faster. After all, he rushed after him, trying to protect his friend and telling the boss that he was his opponent. But the Lizardman King didn't even turn around. He was determined to finish off at least one of them. Things were bad. Michael saw that the distance between them was too great, and he couldn't keep up. And then a crazy idea came to his mind. He thought that if he couldn't help the guy himself, let others do it. The item in his arsenal had another additional effect of his unique characteristic. He used Summon Dead near James, and two dead skeletons immediately appeared around the guy. Each of them had a blade, and they were determined, covering James with their bodies. Of course, such warriors could do nothing against the power of the Lizardman King. But that was not what Michael used them for. He himself understood that they did not have enough strength to stop such a giant. But the second gained with their help was worth it. Allowed him to use the stacks of the skill Wind's Grace and increase his speed by 60%. This was enough to get close to the boss in the blink of an eye and cut him to pieces. Michael landed near James, who was grateful to him for saving his life. The Lizard King, meanwhile, was unable to maintain life for long with his head cut off. He died, and Michael immediately absorbed his soul, permanently increasing all of his stats by 1 point. In addition, he absorbed a new third-rank spiritual eye skill that allowed him to recognize attacks. The team leader from the hunting association just yawned out of boredom because he was tired of waiting. He asked his partners, who were on duty near the portal, if anything had happened. But they answered negatively, and the guy thought that soon they would have to act as always. After all, usually their squad entered the portal to finish off the boss after the advanced team of hunters. He also thought that they would be able to get their share if the attacking team cleared the entire first block. But then his enthusiasm quickly disappeared, because he himself understood that this was only possible with a high rank. And is there even one high-class hunter who would pull off such a crazy stunt? As he thought about this, two people from the advanced team suddenly came out of the portal. His partners reported that these guys had already finished clearing the entire dungeon, and this surprised him. The leader couldn't believe that they went into the dungeon just the two of them. After all, based on this, their group should have gone no more than half the way, but not the entire dungeon. But later, the leader saw that, contrary to his thoughts, the guys were still telling the truth. He saw this on the portal. It suddenly became colorless, and this only indicated that the boss room had been completely cleared. This thought made the manager a little happy, but he was confused. not understanding how this was even possible. He ran up to the guys and introduced himself as the head of the group monitoring the portals of the Hunters Association. James then asked if he was here to buy portal occupation rights. The guy added that in that case, there was only one person in front of him to whom he should make an offer. He said that Michael had cleared the entire dungeon on his own, which made Mr. Roger even more surprised. He asked if the guy was a top rank, but Michael replied that he was only a rank 2. However, he said that it was not important, asking how much he wanted to pay for the rights to occupy the portal. Then the manager cleared his throat, saying that if we return to the main thread of the conversation, then he and his portal control team wanted to buy the right to occupy the portal from him for 200,000 won. These were simply incredible sums, and of course Michael agreed. Meanwhile, Betty worked without rest. The girl thought that after returning from the Tower of Trials, all she did was work like a horse. Suddenly her phone rang, and she was surprised to see who was calling her at such a late hour. Beatrice served as the team leader for the Challenge Tower's Challenger monitoring team. The girl's work was mostly paperwork, so she always had to deal with documents. Even then, the girl thought that this coming would undoubtedly lead to revolutionary changes. After all, even if the applicants hide their identities, she never thought that recruiting them would be so difficult. She didn't even manage to recruit 10 people, and all of these applicants were of low complexity. Of course, this was not enough to satisfy the top management, and Betty began to think. For some reason, she remembered a guy named Michael, with whom she ended up on the same team on the 4th floor. She became curious about how this guy was doing now, and suddenly she regretted not proposing to him earlier. It was then that she was distracted by the ringing of the phone, and when she looked at the person calling her, she was very surprised. It was that same Michael, who, however, did not wait for her to accept the call and simply sent her a message. It said that if she also returned to Earth successfully, then he would like to meet her. Meanwhile, the guy checked his account and was surprised to find that he had earned almost 300,000 won. However, he felt amazing and even thought about buying a new house for himself. The guy was sitting in the cafe that served as his meeting place with Betty, and soon the girl came too. Michael noticed that she seemed to have run here as fast as she could, so he said that she shouldn't have been in such a hurry. But the girl started by saying that he didn't even respond to her message, which she sent him a long time ago. She asked him if he knew how long she had been waiting for his answer, and Michael, hearing this, blushed a little. He then apologized, saying that he must have been in a hurry in the trial tower, but the girl brushed him off. She said she held no grudge against him and asked if he was planning to continue climbing to the upper floors of the tower. The guy answered positively, saying that this was exactly why he called her here, because he needed to join some guild. He immediately voiced his conditions, among which was the right to refuse the order to immediately appear at the guild. Next came non-interference in his affairs related to the Tower of Trials and permission to use the guild dungeons. When he finished, he noticed that the girl was urinating and thought that perhaps he had gone a little too far. But then she spoke up, saying that the conditions he had proposed were absolutely impossible to fulfill. After all, from the guild's point of view, she had nothing to gain. And then Michael said that perhaps he had asked for too much. Suddenly, he took the girl by the hand, pushing his fingers into hers, and she didn't even want to think about what it meant. She desperately invited him to join their white guild, and then suddenly added something unbelievable. The girl said that she would do everything to make these impossible conditions feasible, which surprised him greatly. Their meeting took place yesterday evening, and this morning he was already driving to a new place, and he did it on the roof of a bus. Michael thought he had had a very productive day yesterday, from raiding and dungeons to joining a guild. Although for the latter he still has one task left to complete, to clear a rank 2 dungeon alone. It was Betty's request yesterday because she said he had to demonstrate his abilities. This will make it easier for her to convince the guild leader and the others to accept him and agree to his terms. Michael noticed that her words meant that not everyone could use the guild's dungeons. Therefore, the person who will be able to do this must be either a rising star or an outstanding hunter. Then he asked to prepare everything he needed to clear the second-rank dungeon and shook Betty's hand. He was driving to another area, but when more and more houses started appearing, the guy decided to stretch his legs a little. He jumped off the bus and suddenly ran straight to his destination. Moreover, he did it so quickly that the people nearby only had time to be surprised by his speed. A few minutes later, he was already there, approaching the portal, where the guards were still standing. Meanwhile, Betty also arrived at the right place, telling someone that she was confirming a reservation to storm this dungeon. The man in charge said everything was fine without even looking at her ID. He then suggested that she sit down and wait a little, since there was still an hour left before the start. But what was his surprise when he saw Mike, who arrived a whole hour earlier? He asked Miss Beatty if she could go to the dungeon right now, without delay, and she didn't know what to answer. The girl stood there for a while, lost in thought, while he began to sing and wave the smoke across the beach. Betty asked if such a strong wind could have been caused by just running, which shocked her a little. Michael replied that he had nothing to do anyway, and the girl thought that this guy was not human. Then she said that he had already gone through all the verification procedures, so if he was ready, they could begin. Michael nodded, and soon the two of them found themselves on the other side of the portal, this time finding themselves somewhere in a field. Michael asked in surprise what they were doing there, and the girl was silent for a while, peering into the distance. Seeing this, Michael told her to be sure to let him know if she was in danger. She added that she was wearing an artifact given to her by the guild. This effect had the function of a shield and weak invisibility. After all, if she attracts the attention of the monsters, then she will help him to some extent, so she will stay away. Michael replied that it was just wonderful because now he could fight in peace. The boy activated the spiritual eye skill that he had received from the Lizardman King. He wanted to check it out, and suddenly he saw, or rather felt, the presence of enemies in front of him. These enemies were invisible to the eye, and he realized with surprise that he would be able to do little with them. The difficulty was added by the fact that there was a field around, in which it was extremely difficult to notice anything. But Michael clearly saw the grass around him shaking from someone's footsteps, so he got ready. And then suddenly an enemy appeared. Several monsters immediately attacked him from all sides. These creatures were somewhat similar to lizardmen, but, as Michael noted, they did not possess any particular intelligence. Seeing the monsters, Betty was surprised to think that it was a poisonous fisher, but it did not match the level of the dungeon. She shouted at Michael to be careful, because the opponent was about rank 1, so it was not an equal fight. But, to her surprise, the guy had already dealt with almost all the monsters with his incredible strength. The poisonous fisherman didn't even have time to carry out one poisonous attack, which made Michael very happy. And Betty stood in shock from what she had just seen, because it was incredible and at the same time crazy. The fishermen kept arriving in greater numbers from the portal leading to the boss room, but Michael repelled all their attacks. He had a lot of skills, but besides that, he had excellent stats, including strength and endurance. The guy didn't seem to get tired. He killed monsters as if he did it around the clock, but in fact, that was the case. Suddenly, his lightning effect activated, and Michael thought that it was so rare that he had already forgotten about it. Suddenly, one of the poisonous fishermen came up behind him, intending to be the first to attack him. But Michael was not going to allow this. He grabbed the monster by the tail and spun it around in the air, and then he brought it down to the ground with such force that after that the fisherman no longer continued the fight. This was the last monster that appeared in the area, but the guy decided to wait a little longer. He wanted Betty to see everything in person, so he called over a girl who was standing nearby so as not to disturb him. Michael added that he had more or less put things in order, so that the girl could approach without any fear. And she couldn't believe her eyes that he reached the portal leading to the boss's room in less than an hour. But the most amazing thing was that he did it alone, and even defeated such difficult monsters. After all, the poisonous fisher was one of the monsters recommended for group attacks. So Betty still couldn't believe that Michael had dealt with him so quickly, as if he were playing with a child. Besides, she understood that this was not the limit of his abilities, and that he would show more in the future. It was impossible to even imagine. Meanwhile, Michael successfully absorbed souls and increased his stats. He thought that with the level he had now, even the boss wouldn't pose much of a threat. He then told Betty that he was going to the boss's room and stepped into the portal, with the girl following right behind him. They found themselves in a huge forest, which, judging by its size, belonged to someone big. Betty said it was a bit strange because they had already gone quite far and still hadn't seen the boss. But usually he shows up literally immediately if you invade his territory. However, suddenly some kind of attack fell upon them from above, and they realized that the boss was cunning. All this time he waited for them to approach the place where he had set a trap, and then attacked from above. It was very dangerous, and Michael realized that the girl would not have time to dodge the blow. Luckily, he was close enough to grab her and carry her away from the spot where the boss had struck. Betty didn't even understand what had just happened, but she clearly felt how the guy was holding her. Meanwhile, Fisher Booze activated his attack, aiming at the boy and girl who managed to dodge. He released a powerful column of blue fire, something Michael had never seen before, but it looked dangerous. He continued to run away with Betty in his arms, and she pointed out the approaching attack from behind. The guy had literally one moment to react, because then there was a huge explosion in the place where they were. But Michael was able to move to a safe place, telling Betty that he hoped she would understand. They sat on a tree branch, which were quite large here, and watched the fisherman boss. He noticed them in the meantime and ducked down, taking a new fighting stance to attack. Then Michael said that he would leave the girl here and deal with this creature himself, but Betty stopped him. She suggested using the enhancement skill on him, but the guy responded negatively, saying that he had to do everything himself. He added that he would be back soon, and with these words he rushed down to the enraged king of fishermen. While he was flying, he managed to come up with a tactic with which he would fight, because this was very important. First he put his feet out, and when he landed, the ground shook from the force with which he did it. Even the boss was surprised by this, and Michael activated the instant acceleration skill and the exclusive effect from the boots. On top of all this, he added the effect of the skill Wind's Grace, stacking it 7 times, and his speed increased by 70%. Now Michael could dodge any attack. Even if the enemy attacked from behind, he pounced on the boss. But he couldn't even keep up with his speed, so he missed the moment when the guy was right under his nose. The monster decided to attack based on the fact that he would want to finish him off anyway, and that was the right decision. But before he could do any damage to Michael, he used the 3 absolute skill. Thanks to him, the boss was defeated, and out of habit, the guy chopped off his head and looked up at Betty. The girl kept her eyes on him the whole time, and then a system window appeared, informing her that the boss had been defeated. Betty thought that now she was completely confused about who the monster was, because Michael's abilities were incredible, and he involuntarily thought that he had gone a little overboard with cutting up the boss, but now it didn't matter. When they emerged from the first portal, Betty admitted that she didn't expect a rank 2 hunter to be so strong. She added that now that he had passed the test, he could use all of their guild's dungeons, and then she turned away from him so that the guy couldn't see her face and said that she would go off topic a little. But she said that when they are summoned to the Tower of Trials, the difficulty they initially choose does not matter much. After all, even at low difficulty levels, candidates will face increasingly challenging tests, and vice versa. Even at high difficulty, if the performance is poor, then the candidate can slide down to low. Finally, the girl said that, based on this, one could conclude that his level of difficulty was murderous. So she hoped that the guy would try to be a little more careful in future tests. She added that she would like to accompany him for as long as possible and watch him grow. And then they said goodbye. In the evening, Michael sat on the roof of one of the buildings and ate an apple. In 5 minutes, he had to return back to the test tower and thought that these 3 days he had been spinning like a squirrel in a wheel. However, thanks to this, both his stats and his self-confidence increased, which he really liked. But his time on Earth ended, and he returned to the Tower of Trials where it all began. The guy was even glad to move there again, because for some reason the challenges attracted him. Once he had rested a bit on the bed, Michael stood up and called the test command. The system asked if he was ready to move on to the test on the 8th floor, and the guy answered positively. Then he was asked to choose a point of intersection from 3 available ones: tactics, combat, and capture. Michael remembered seeing a mention of creating an intersection point earlier, so everything should be fine. He also thought that he should choose combat if he wanted to increase the effectiveness of necromancy. Next came the message that all of his personal tests would now be based on combat skills. And then suddenly a message appeared saying that he had the title of Pioneer. What happened next surprised Michael, because he read that he would now have a private chat with the administrator. The system then reported the start of a consultation with the Steel Bloodlord, the manager of the combat intersection point. And suddenly Michael found himself in another location, which apparently was not a test, because he did not enter the portal. The guy looked around asking where he was, and the system window told him that he had entered the world of Steel Blood. It was winter, and most likely, he found himself in some kind of forest, where everything was strewn with swords and other weapons. Michael decided to explore the place himself and use the Eye of Truth for this. The world of Steel Blood turned out to be a space created especially for her by the Lord of Steel Blood. This place had no rank and could not be invaded. Suddenly, Michael saw a message saying that the Lord was unhappy that someone was making inquiries. And then right behind Michael, one of the swords began to move and acquired powerful energy. The administrator of the Steel Blood Lord suggested that he not waste time on nonsense and follow the sword. Michael was a little surprised by this message, but he decided that it would be better to listen to the admin. The sword pointed the way and floated slowly in the air so that the boy could calmly follow it. After a while, he stopped because he had reached his destination and was now looking at it. It was a small house that looked completely ordinary, but Michael knew he had to go in there. When he opened the doors, he read that the administrator, Lord of Steelblood, was looking at him. There was a rather attractive girl sitting in front of him who said that he had finally arrived. She added that she was the administrator who was assigned to consult with him. Michael noticed that she looked like a foreign beauty, but for some reason she was called the Lord of Steelblood. After all, in fact, before him was a being who carried out control in the Tower of Trials. And then the girl suddenly came close to him, looking questioningly into his eyes. The girl said she was curious about what the monster looked like, and she admitted that it was pretty good. Michael asked if she knew him, and the girl replied that, of course, she knew everything. But she also noted that she only knew about his tests from reports, since it was impossible to observe the candidates below the 8th floor. This surprised Michael a little because the girl was an administrator, but she could not watch just anyone. Then the girl said that he must have misunderstood something because the admins did not control the tower at all. She added that they should rather be seen as creatures subordinate to the tower, so he shouldn't be so nervous. After all, while she was subordinate to the tower, she could not harm him, and this information became a revelation for Michael. Then the girl said that, after all, she was there for a consultation, so he could ask her about anything. Michael felt that there was no hostility in her, so he decided to trust the girl. Besides, she explained earlier that this consultation was his advantage earned in the trials. Then Michael remembered how he almost died at the hands of a challenger from another floor when he himself was on the 5th. He wanted to know why the knight had chosen him, and the girl replied that there were advantages to it. After all, applicants from other worlds come from where the tower has existed for decades. They also know that the tower of this world will one day be united with the towers of other worlds. Starting from the 20th floor, the focus is on combined challenges rather than individual ones. And then the guy would have to meet with candidates from other worlds. Michael was not happy about this. Then he asked another, broader question, wanting to know what the trial tower was in general. Suddenly he saw the girl look down and wait a minute before answering. And then she said that she herself would like to know the answer to this question because, unfortunately, she did not have this information. Then Michael reminded her that she was an administrator and asked if the girl really didn't know anything. She then explained that initially the administrators were the same applicants as they were, but those who die after passing the 40th floor are given the right to be reborn as administrators. The thought that the administrators were just former applicants angered him a little. After all, Michael hoped that they still knew something about the top of the tower and where it ended. The girl didn't like these words and she suddenly grabbed the guy by the neck, pressing him against the wall. She said that the words "top of the tower" were not something to be said so lightly. Michael was surprised, not so much by what she said, but by the force and speed with which she attacked him. The girl noticed that he was not particularly puzzled and asked if he was not scared at all. To this, Michael replied that he simply did not feel any hostility from her, and besides, the consultation was to his advantage. He also had no intention of allowing her to harm him so easily and suddenly broke through the wall. The guy prepared to attack, saying that the girl actually said that she obeyed the tower. The administrator was a little surprised by his behavior, but she quickly realized that she had acted recklessly. She noticed that she had been living for many years, but this was the first time she'd seen someone who was able to destroy the administrator's residence. And then she unexpectedly added that the guy's actions convinced her of something, and he became wary. But Michael was not prepared for what she said next, because it was the first time he had heard anything like this. The girl offered him a patronage agreement, which was quite surprising but incomprehensible. After some time, he returned back to the waiting room on the 8th floor and lay down on the bed. Suddenly, he remembered that he could now use the new team and opened an exclusive store. His contractor was the Steel Bloodlord. There were 3 categories in total: skills, strength, and items. The guy remembered how the girl had told him that she couldn't pass up a candidate who was both brave and talented. And then the system window asked if he wanted to sign a patronage agreement. Of course, Michael agreed and read that he would soon have access to an exclusive store. As a special benefit, all of his stats would increase by 1, and he would also receive special points. Michael selected the power category in the exclusive store and became familiar with its 3 components. He wanted to see the list further, but received a message that he could only do this on the 10th floor. It turned out that at the moment only 3 powers were available to him: Purity of Mind, Steel Soul, and the King of Winter. He opened the first one's description and read that it allows one to maintain rationality in any situation. The power of Steel Soul allowed the mastery of all types of weapons to be increased by 2.32 times. The last power temporarily increased the user's stats in cold conditions, and he would not feel the cold. All these descriptions seemed somewhat ambiguous, and Michael thought that he would first accumulate some more CO. However, he quickly changed his mind and still bought his first power, which was Purity of Mind. Thanks to her, He will be able to reason clearly in any situation and not succumb to panic and stress. After all, it was better to raise the bar for survival in this way than to not prepare for anything at all. Because there was a chance that he would face a floor-level implementation again right now. The system asked if he was ready to begin the test on the 8th floor, and Michael answered positively, entering the portal. The theme of this trial was destruction. He had to defeat a lich that summoned skeletons. But when Michael came out of the portal, he was surprised that the number of opponents was so great. He thought that this was an attempt to overwhelm the enemy with numbers, so he decided not to delay and begin the cleanup. The guy jumped off the cliff he was standing on and landed right in the center of a cluster of skeletons. He killed some of them immediately with a powerful shockwave, but now, close combat was ahead. The skeletons pounced on him. They were similar to the ones he had summoned in the dungeon. They also had weapons, but Michael successfully dodged all their attacks without even doing anything. After all, as expected, they couldn't even penetrate his basic defense. After all, the skeletons were so frail. He destroyed them one by one, but soon realized that there were more and more of them. With each new skeleton he killed, his skill only increased by 0.08%, and it was annoying. However, the guy continued to fight, intending to get to the lich as quickly as possible. But it was still useless to improve skills during this test. Suddenly, he heard a voice asking who he was and how he dared to commit atrocities in his sanctuary. Michael looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, but it was difficult for him to do so. So the guy decided to use one of his trump cards and performed the summoning of the dead. The system window informed him that he had absorbed souls to summon skeleton soldiers. He summoned almost all the skeletons, leaving himself only one soul just in case. So he left his new assistants to deal with the enemies, and he himself went to the boss's head. The guy activated Wind's Grace and stacked the effect 6 times, increasing his speed by 60%. He also applied the effect of the rank 2+ speed boots, which also instantly increased his speed. Suddenly, he saw the silhouette of a castle in front of him and realized that the boss was most likely there. Michael thought it was amazing that he could summon skeletal corpses from such a distance. However, that was precisely why it was necessary to get rid of him as quickly as possible, and Michael picked up the pace. The Skeleton King, meanwhile, didn't expect to see the guy here and so quickly. He was standing on the roof of one of the buildings inside his castle, and Michael landed right in front of him. The king remarked that he was an impudent boy who dared to cross the threshold of his sanctuary. He added that he would make him pay in full for his insolence, and suddenly the king summoned new monsters. This time they were sand golems, and Michael was surprised that this boss could command them too. Then the guy realized that he was probably not capable of fighting on his own, so he called on others. Michael smiled and suddenly asked if he could by any chance summon someone stronger. After all, if he doesn't have any more powerful exhibits in his arsenal, then this will disappoint him a little. Hearing this, the king became angry, saying that these guards would be quite enough to tear him to pieces. The golems were advancing in the meantime, but Michael had already activated the instant acceleration skill. He dealt with all the new opponents within 3 seconds, which greatly surprised the king of the dead. And then he even managed to get scared because the guy rushed straight at him, intending to finish him off. He swung his sword and hit him, causing him to fall, and the system window reported that his mastery had increased by 1.2%. Michael noticed that the undead were definitely increasing his skill quickly, and it was a nice feeling. The king of the dead wondered where this monster came from, because his powers were simply beyond the bounds of possibility. In his eyes, the guy was a real monster, eager to kill all monsters for his own pleasure. Michael, meanwhile, took a swing, saying that they could finish little by little. The guy also realized that the king freely summoned various monsters using the book. And if so, then perhaps he too will be able to master this skill. Michael smiled maliciously. He suddenly grabbed the book and threw it to the dead king, asking if he could summon those guardians again. He was a little perplexed and asked in response why he was asking him such questions. But Michael calmly replied that if he couldn't, then they would end on that note. And then the boss protested. He said he was able to summon the guardians again minutes after their death. He also asked why Michael needed this, but seeing how he swung at him, he said that he would immediately begin the call. A couple of seconds later, sand golems, which the boss managed to summon again, ran towards the guy with an attack. And of course, within those same couple of seconds, Michael dealt with them again, which was obvious. Then the king of the dead asked if the boy was happy now, but Michael answered negatively. He said they were just getting started, so the boss still has to summon all the skeletons that haven't died yet. Michael also ordered him to put all their strength into these guards and almost forced him to do it by force. The king didn't even understand why he was doing this. He asked until when he had to do this. But Michael was busy killing monsters In fact, he had a reason why he did all this. He told the dead king to continue until he told him to stop. That was enough. The boss managed to summon golems that became larger and faster due to merging with skeletons. However, it made no difference to Michael. He still dealt with them easily. And these golems were much more useful than the single skeletons he fought at the beginning. After all, for golems he was given plus 1.2%, and soon the mastery of his unique characteristic reached 100%. Thanks to this, her rank increased by 1 level, and the guy clearly felt these changes. Then he smiled contentedly, because now his necromancy was also at level 2, and this was impressive. Meanwhile, the king of the dead had already used up almost all of his strength and cursed the guy for it. He called him a crazy bastard who would make even the devil himself tremble. And Michael noticed that the fact that with each call, he had more and more cracks spoke of his imminent death. It wasn't a good scenario for the guy because he wanted to use it a little more. The king's last words were that meeting the guy was the most disgusting thing that had ever happened to him. And then Michael cut off his head and immediately saw the message received a new achievement and increased stats. He also didn't forget to absorb the Lich's spirit. And after that, the system reported the successful completion of the 8th floor. As a reward, all of his stats were increased by 2, and he also received 30,000 points and 1,000 SP. A moment later, a portal appeared and he returned safely to the waiting room. He then received a message that the system had been expanded and administrators could now monitor the tests. The restrictions on questions were lifted and it became possible to acquire rank 2 skills. Michael opened a window with information about his stats. They were all approximately the same level. He went to his unique stat information to read about the new additional effect. Now, when absorbing someone else's skill, he could completely inherit the deceased person's skill. Also, when absorbing the spirit of the deceased, there was a 20% chance that one of his skills would be acquired. Michael thought the 8th floor test had ended rather smoothly, but he clearly shouldn't have relaxed. The guy thought that he could still continue using the sword, but he had a problem with his shield and skills. After all, ever since he had maxed out his hunter's dagger skill, he needed a new skill. So Michael went into the store to buy something to replace the old effect. However, his hopes were not justified because he did not see anything there that was worthwhile or better than what he had. Then he thought that if there was no skill, then he needed to create one, and bought the 5th rank basic fencing skill. It was a normal skill that enhanced the sword's abilities, but Michael needed it for another purpose. He was going to upgrade the rank of the hunter's dagger through skill synthesis, so he needed a second component. The guy hoped to guess the best compatibility, so he chose these 2 skills to synthesize. The system issued a message stating that the synthesis would be centralized around the hunter's dagger. And then he read that he had a 75% chance of synthesizing a higher level skill. Michael liked this statement because he realized that he had correctly predicted compatibility. So he started the process, and after a while he saw that a new skill had been created. It was called Demon Slayer and was rank 2, which surprised Michael. He went into the store to check it out. This skill increased basic knowledge of all types of fencing and increased cutting power by 3 times. An additional effect was that the speed was doubled when fighting non-humans. Michael thought that this skill was just perfect for hunting monsters. He even thought about trying to synthesize the remaining skills. After all, the guy checked their compatibility and the probability of synthesis, so he saw no reason not to try. From accelerated regeneration and resistance to the laws of nature, he received the skill of Iron Blood Regeneration. And from the regeneration of Iron Blood and Pain Tolerance, he obtained the 1-rank Ash Blood skill. This was the primary racial trait that a mutant vampire was born with, and he also received Enhanced Regeneration. In addition, he could block up to 40% of damage, which in itself was cheating. Michael figured he wouldn't be able to test this skill properly in the waiting room anyway. After all, it was equipped with a regeneration effect, so he canceled it in the store for 50 points. Michael put his hand out and swung his sword at her, thinking that since all the spirits had been absorbed, the shield would not activate. With this thought in mind, he began to check and cut his hand quite badly. However, the effect of the peninsula's regeneration justified his hopes and even exceeded them. After all, his hand healed with lightning speed. In essence, he was now under eternal healing. And in addition to this level of regeneration, he also had a spiritual shield. Then the guy opened a community, but it seemed to him that he didn't find anything there worth his attention. Besides, the time spent in the waiting room was coming to an end, so there was no point in dragging it out any longer. With this thought, he entered the portal to the 9th floor test, where the theme was fighting, the difficulty was high, and 1 day was given for everything. The condition for successful completion was killing all the monsters in the arena within the allotted time. The reward for a successful breakthrough was a new skill, second-rank animal instinct, and the penalty was death. But suddenly Michael saw a message from the system, which said that at the present time. This test is not safe for him due to the confirmed floor implantation of a challenger from the world of Murim. The theft of the target by this contender was also confirmed, but Michael had already made his decision. He entered the portal and immediately saw a pile of defeated monsters on which the invader stood. It was clearly no longer a young man who introduced himself as the commander of the Murim Union, Albert. Immediately after this, Michael received a message that the test objective had been changed and he was now required to kill the intruder. The man asked Michael what his name was, but the boy asked why he was bringing that up out of the blue. To this, the man replied that he had already revealed his name and position, but Michael still had not been identified. He said that the man had clearly not had good intentions when he invaded his floor, so there was no point in introducing himself. The intruder then replied that there was a certain etiquette between fencers. Michael was speechless. He wondered if there really wasn't a single normal warrior among the candidates from other systems. The man, seeing that the boy was not going to answer, took out his sword and said that in that case he could not do anything. With that, he attacked him. Michael had to admit he was moving quite fast. Then suddenly the invader used some kind of skill that brought down a hail of sword blows on Michael. In turn, the guy activated the skill Wind's Mercy and increased his turn by 30%. Thanks to this, he was able to repel all of his attacks, and the man was surprised by this, because few people succeeded in doing this. They jumped away from each other, preparing to regroup their forces and counterattack. The man said that it turns out that in this dimension there is also such an experienced warrior. He suddenly apologized for looking down on the guy, but Michael didn't need his apology. He suddenly turned to the man, telling him to stop being a hypocrite because he was here to kill him, and also to steal his reward. And if he has already come with such intentions, then let him not pretend to be polite. It was disgusting, and Michael glared at him, ready to pounce and kill. To this, the man replied that, probably because he was from different worlds, they could not understand each other. He then raised his sword, and Michael realized that he was preparing to use a new technique and prepared himself. The man told the boy to rest in peace because he was about to meet his end. And Michael saw that due to his unique characteristic of sword light, he was blinded for 5 seconds. The guy realized that he couldn't see anything, and it even scared him because the enemy had 5 seconds for a free attack. Michael activated his magic resistance skill and was able to reduce the vision loss effect to 2.5 seconds. Then he activated the spiritual eye skill, allowing him to recognize attacks in the invisible range. Thanks to this, he could repel an enemy attack in time, even if he did not see it. The next moment, Michael felt the blade of a sword near his neck and dodged at the last second. He even got a new achievement, Avoid Blindness, and all his stats increased by 2. The effect of the unique characteristic sword light was disabled. Both opponents bounced away from each other. The man was surprised at how the boy fought, as he was the first challenger from Earth to repel his attack. Meanwhile, Michael's Ash Blood skill activated, and he thought that his throat had almost been cut. The man asked how he calculated the trajectory of his sword, but the boy was not going to answer him further. He activated the skill Instant Acceleration and Wind Grace, increasing his speed by 50%, and then he rushed into battle. Michael wanted to quickly deal with this man, who was standing there as a polite person. He saw this and prepared to defend himself. But for now, the initiative in the battle was on no one's side. Their blades met, and now each tried to find the opponent's weak point and break through the defense. Michael began to use not only the sword but his entire body. This knowledge came to him thanks to a new skill. But to his viva-v, the man managed to block everything and also fenced quite well. When Michael kicked him again, he swung to pierce his leg. Luckily, Michael managed to avoid this blow, and he even decided that it was now worth trying other techniques. And yet, it was surprising that the man managed to block all the attacks when Michael delivered them at high speed. But the guy was also not inferior to the invader in skills. He also blocked his blows well, not allowing him to be hit. Their abilities were about the same level, but Michael didn't know how many floors this man had already climbed. The man meanwhile noticed that the guy was using some strange and unusual techniques. He added that he was a little puzzled because he did not expect to meet such a strong opponent. After all, despite his incredible growth, their characteristics were, in essence, on the same level. So after a moment, the man's face changed. He said that from that second on he would be serious. After that, he waved his hand and used his unique characteristic again, blinding Michael for 5 minutes. But this time the guy already knew what to do. He quickly activated the skill Magic Resistance and Spiritual Eye. In this way, he was able to reduce the duration of the blinding effect to 2.5 minutes. but the enemy had already attacked. Michael noticed that the speed of the intruder's strikes had increased, and this did not please him at all. If it weren't for the effects of the skills, he would never have seen the attack, or rather, felt it. The guy activated the effect of the wrought iron pendant steel protection rank 1. Thanks to this, he now absorbed 10% of all pain from physical attacks, which was just right. However, his shield suddenly cracked and the steel defense skill was activated. Just at that moment, the darkening effect ended and Michael could see his opponent again. He realized that he couldn't use his technique all the time because it needed to be recharged. So without wasting any time, Michael rushed to attack the man, using everything he had at hand or foot. He kicked a rock right into the man's face, and he couldn't understand how the guy managed to fend off his attacks. The man easily cut through the stone thrown at him, and then went on the counterattack. But Michael was already rushing in the other direction, and in the blink of an eye he found himself behind the intruder. He didn't expect this, because such speed amazed him, but the man prepared to defend himself. For some reason, the guy didn't attack, and when Albert turned around to see what he was doing, he was surprised. After all, the wound on his arm left by his sword healed with amazing speed. Seeing this, the man said that she had already thought that the guy was a good martial arts master, but all his techniques were borrowed from somewhere. Michael replied that the old man's unique power was also given out by the tower. He then activated the skill Wind's Grace and increased his speed to a maximum of 70%. Albert held out his sword, wanting to add something else, but he didn't have time to finish because of Michael's unexpected attack. The guy was already hanging over him, swinging for a blow, so the man had to quickly defend himself. He barely managed to do it at the last second and was very surprised that the guy's speed increased noticeably. Returning to his words, Michael asked how he felt about dying from a borrowed ability. He pressed harder on the sword, and Albert had to hold back the onslaught with all his strength in order to survive. He thought that he had done floor penetration dozens of times before, and it was the same with this floor. With his sword, he chopped down opponents from different worlds, but he especially liked the planet Earth. In particular, because the people of this world were weak in terms of abilities in all respects. The challengers from Earth were unable to touch even a hair on his head. And besides, one attack was always enough for him, and this time he was sure that history would repeat itself. Just at that moment, Michael almost touched him. Albert dodged at the last moment and realized that this could not continue any longer, because he was starting to lose. This angered the man, so he decided to take the initiative into his own hands and end this battle. After another fight, they jumped away from each other, gathering strength for the next attack. Michael was also wounded, because the enemy wielded the sword well, but all his cuts healed instantly. The same could not be said about Albert, who was clearly already at the limit of his abilities and was breathing heavily. Unexpectedly, the system issued messages that the administrator of the White Crane Sword admired the young applicant. The admin of the Monster of the North predicts his imminent defeat, and the Lord of the Late Night has become interested in him. Albert, although he didn't have a video of all these messages, understood that the administrators were probably watching them. This meant that if he ended the fight now with a victory, he would probably get new opportunities. With this thought in mind, Albert activated the skill One Strike, Two Skins, and Lightning Sword Chi. These were followed by the skills One Strike and Nymph Walk, all of which greatly improved his stats. The man even changed in appearance. He suddenly began to emanate incredible strength that was not there before. But Michael found this amusing, reminding him how he had just a moment ago blackened any techniques he had received. Suddenly, the system displayed a message for Albert, which stated that there was a floor penetration penalty. All of his stats were reduced by 8, and some of his skills were forcibly deactivated. But the recovery time of the sword light had ended, so he used the technique again. Michael, however, had already gotten used to it, so he was able to guess the moment when the enemy would attack him. This time, the attack was from behind, but thanks to his spiritual eye, he was able to sense it at the last moment. At the same time, Michael activated the skill 3 Absolutes, and his attacks became significantly stronger. He knew where the enemy would be, and he was not at all embarrassed that he would be striking literally blindly. The boy swung his blade and brought it down where he thought his opponent would be. Unexpectedly, the effect of Albert's unique characteristic was turned off early. Both swordsmen were standing next to each other. Michael was bent over from fatigue, shortness of breath, and pain, but was happy that he had succeeded. Albert let go of the sword, although he continued to stand. It was not for long. After all, Michael cut his body in half and it was bound to fall apart. The man only managed to say that this couldn't be, but the wound was fatal. So the next moment his body fell to the ground, splitting into 2 parts, and Michael caught his breath. He was tired, as using skills consumed a lot of mana, but he was glad that he won. The system congratulated him on successfully passing the 9th floor of the test tower, and the guy smiled. He absorbed Albert's soul, and his skill increased by a whopping 27%, and the breakthrough rewards changed. The system reported that they did not match the difficulty of the battle, so a revision was made. When it was all over, he received a new rank 2+ skill, 6th Sense, as a reward. He was also given 30,000 points and 1,000 SO, after which a portal opened and the guy headed there. He also noticed that this skill had a much higher rank than the one that was originally rewarded. However, Michael decided to look at the details in the waiting room, so he stepped towards the entrance to the portal. Many administrators who watched his fight expressed their impression and delight from his battle. Michael stood frozen in front of the portal entrance, reading all this, and suddenly a smile appeared on his face. Then he remembered that earlier there was talk about expanding the system where admins would be able to monitor him. Either way, they were delighted with his fight, and the guy felt a slight sense of satisfaction. Then suddenly he read that the Lord of Steelblood condemned the excessive interest in the contactor. She added that the guy should not become obsessed with the increased attention from administrators. Just at this moment, the administrator of the White Crane Sword offered him an exclusive power. Michael was surprised by this, because he didn't know that administrators could hand out powers so easily. Then he read that the Steel Bloodlord said in a dissatisfied tone that he could accept the power. She added that there are times when they sponsor force to gain the favor of a contractor. White Crane Sword added with a laugh that in the future, they would have many situations where they would have to face each other. And the Steel Bloodlord said that the power provided would be so strong that he would feel a certain burden. Then Michael said that in that case he had no need to doubt, and he would accept the power with gratitude. The system immediately reported that the power of the Chi Swordmaster had been added to his exclusive store. The White Crane Sword asked the boy with a smile on his face not to forget this kindness, and Michael thanked him. When he returned to the waiting room, the system had expanded again. Now he had access to the common areas, but the guy didn't understand what that meant. He was interested in something else. After all, he didn't know if the system administrators could watch him in the waiting room too. Deciding, however, that he could not escape it, Michael opened an exclusive contractor's shop. He looked at his powers and found a new one among them, which also turned out to be a good 2+ rank. According to the description, this power allowed him to significantly improve his sword skills as well as the sword itself. He could infuse his mana into the weapon and use the so-called Chi Sword, which was much better than the usual one. But Michael also realized that he now had access to the second page in the exclusive store. When he went there, he saw a new list of powers consisting of 3 options, 2+, high-, and 1 ranks respectively. The first power, Bone Reconstruction, increased all of his stats by 2, and he also became susceptible to any martial art. The power of the Steel Blood Sword allowed one to summon a Steel Blood Sword made of mana. The final power, Hand of Death, doubled the effectiveness of necromancy and black magic. However, each of these forces was quite expensive, and Michael only had 2,000 forge points at his disposal, so the only power he was able to buy at the moment was either Bone Reconstruction or Chi Swordmaster, which was added to his exclusive store by one of the administrators. The first thought was to save up some more SO in order to buy several powers at once in the future. Then the guy remembered that the man Albert, who invaded his 9th floor, was a real monster. This means that in order not to die at the hands of such scoundrels, it was first necessary to buy more strength. After thinking about this, Michael chose the Chi Swordmaster and acquired this power for 1,500 SF. Having received new power, the boy thought that the skill 3 Absolutes also uses mana. But here the feeling is completely different. If we call the mana that flows into the sword instantly like a wave a triple absolute skill, then perhaps the power of a Chi Swordmaster should be compared to a stream of water flowing over a sword. After using this power for 1 minute, the system gave messages about increasing mana consumption by 2%.